Have your attention, please. So, um, you'll notice that there's no panel here. And there's a reason why there's no panel. You effectively in this room are the panel. The way this open house discussion works is that we have questions. We'll give you a little bit of intro, and we'll have questions up on stage, and we'll go around the room getting people's views on those. So if you agree with someone or if you have an additional point, make that point. If you disagree with someone, disagree with them. It is in that conversation that we'll all learn new things because there are people here from different walks of life. There are folks with experience in public policy, folks with experience in law, folks with experience in business, in tech, in investing. And so the idea is everyone comes at something with their own perspective. And it is in a differential understanding of things that we'll find the gaps in our own understanding. So please feel free to debate, to disagree. Please raise your hand and we'll come to you with a mic. We're also hosting this session with some amount of skin in the game. I don't know if you saw, but we launched Medianama's AI deployment yesterday. It's a beta product, but we're still, and we've got good feedback for it already. And we are working on a few other products that we will roll out. And this is the journey for us. It's also, I hope everyone else is playing with AI. It's going to be a journey for you once you realize what it can do. Yesterday, I was at an invite-only sort of discussion with Peter Diamandis, who's the founder of the X Prize and the Singularity University. And he's very bullish on AI solving all of our problems, the pace at which things have changed with AI. He's of the opinion that in the next 3 years, there'll be very little that human beings will actually do. And obviously, that's going to create challenges for us in terms of what do we do, where is our work, right? So I did ask him a question about this, saying that if all of our problems are solved, then what problems will we solve in the future? Because the whole nature of being a human being is that we like finding difficult situations, we like solving problems, and that's how we grow. And if AI is going to be the solution for everything, what do we solve for? He didn't have an answer to that. But we're here with a problem to solve. How is AI going to be regulated? And some part of that problem lies in the idea that AI gives us imperfect outcomes. How many in the room have used AI, ChatGPT, Claude? I'm assuming every single person's used it here, right? We get imperfect outcomes there. So how do you build a regulatory framework for imperfect outcomes, for probabilistic outcomes, where people can change the level of imperfection by changing the temperature settings? How does regulation deal with it? And we've had a couple of issues earlier in the year. In the last 8 months, we've heard IT ministers call multiple platforms for meetings because they were worried about deepfakes. We've had another instance where a fairly ill-advised advisory was released that required registration of large language models that are still unreliable or in testing, and I still don't know what a reliable AI model looks like. What sort of frameworks will we have? And my thinking is that we are one disaster away from bad regulation of AI, which will harm India's AI industry. And we need to balance innovation with safety. We need to figure out a regulatory framework that is both progressive and responsible, but also addresses issues of bias, liability, copyright, imperfect outcomes, and still have an environment where people are allowed to build things. And AI is also like a horizontal, right? So it can't just be a content issue. We will talk about AI agents hopefully as well, because liability for content is one problem. Liability for actions is a very difficult beast to deal with. So we will have 3 sessions. First is the critical question in terms of what do we regulate exactly and how do we regulate it? Because AI itself is very vast. There are recommendation engines. There is generative AI with content and text. There are agents that perform actions. And it looks like AI seems to be clubbing everything together. So do we then slice it up or do we regulate them separately? The other issue is that we do have models that can be used differently. We've got open source models. There is a large language model that we have to deal with at one level. Then there's someone who deploys a large language model. So where is the liability when it comes to the models? Where is the liability when it comes to the developers that use it, to those who deploy it, and with the end user? So where is it? If you have to attribute a bad outcome to someone under law, how do you attribute that bad outcome? Who's responsible? Where is it that there is, in one of our conversations, was where is the intentionality or the impact of outcome, and how is that even determined, right? So there are lots to discuss, lots of things to discuss in terms of nuances. We have, I think, Kamya's put together something like 129 questions for this discussion, or 116, 129, somewhere around that. I don't think we'll be able to cover everything that we want to discuss. But for us, the way we look at things is the questions are very sometimes more important than the answers, because they'll encourage us to think. So our job here is to ask questions. Your job is to answer, and hopefully we'll all learn from each other. Because everyone's coming from different walks of life, it also helps us understand a different perspective. I'm very thankful to Google, to Meta, and to Salesforce for having supported this discussion. We've been wanting to do this for a long time, and we're hoping to do this in Bangalore as well. But to start off with, I'm going to call Varshul over. Varshul, you want to demonstrate the probabilistic stuff on Playground? Maybe sometime later? Okay. I'll call Kamya on stage to just start off the session. Kamya? Sorry, so most of this discussion has been put together by Kamya, including the questions, including this presentation. I'm just here to talk. Kamya, come.
Hi, yeah, one sec. So, because I wasn't here, I'm not sure if Nikhil's run you through the structure. We're basically going to discuss different approaches to regulation. Before each session, we're going to talk about the specific things that we're going to talk about in that session and how other countries are approaching it, and also India, of course. Just to preface everything by saying that none of this is legal advice, business advice, or investment advice. We're not lawyers, we're not consultants, and we're not advisors. And the information that I've kept is fairly selective. Of course, I know everybody probably wants to discuss AI and copyright, but because that's a behemoth in itself, that's not going to be a part of the discussion today. So we'll be looking at the EU AI Act, which is the most structured version of regulation that we have so far. We'll be looking at White House's executive order, which came out last year. UK's context-based approach, which is a white paper that they had brought in last year and have put out their approvals and perspectives on this year in February. China's approach to regulation, some stuff from 2022, some stuff from 2023, and India's infamous advisories. So the first session will be about how and what to regulate. And under this, I wanted to just firstly cover what is regulated in different countries and what isn't. So with the EU AI Act, they've divided AI products into different categories. So there's those with minimal risks, like spam filters in games. At the time, I think, at which they started preparing this act, there were mostly all the AI models that were available were falling in the minimal risk category. There's limited risk, which are things like chatbots and AI-generated content. Deepfakes is what they'd called it. These basically have transparency obligations. So if a user is using an AI model with limited risks, the developer is responsible for basically informing them that they're interacting with a chatbot or with AI-generated content. There's high risk. We'll get into that in a little bit. But before we do, there's certain things which have unacceptable risks that are basically prohibited. This includes things like social scoring. It includes criminal profiling, emotional recognition at the workplace, things like that. Now going into high risk. So these are products or services that are covered under other laws in the EU. It also includes emotional recognition. This is outside the workplace because workplace recognition is prohibited. There's biometric categorization, remote biometric identification, which is like used to verify identity. Those systems are allowed, but other systems which do profiling, not so much. And a range of other categories. Then in the EU executive order, they call it something called super powerful AI models. Now there's a distinction here. In the press release that they'd come out with about the executive order, they called it super powerful AI models. But within the executive order itself, they've used a different term. This is called dual use foundational models. These are models that are trained on broad data, are self-supervising, and contain at least 10 billion parameters. They have capability levels, they have capabilities that can necessarily cause risk to security, to public health, to safety, so on. And they're also regulating AI-generated content. With this, they basically want to ensure that the content that's coming out from the government is identifiable as content coming out from the government, and AI-generated content isn't mistaken as government content. Then in the EU, they don't necessarily have regulation for anybody yet. Just to briefly explain to everyone, the approach that they're going with is sector-specific. So different regulators in different sectors will be regulating AI that falls within their sector. Because they don't have any specific regulation, there is no what to regulate here right now. So they have voluntary measures in general. But if those measures prove to be disproportionate, they're going to introduce 3 different categories. There's highly capable models. These are foundational models which exceed the capabilities of models that are available in the market today. There's highly capable narrow models, which are models that are the most advanced ones that we have today. And then there's AI agents. They are concerned particularly about highly capable models because they think that these wouldn't really fall into any specific sector's regulation, and as such would not necessarily fall well within the approach that they've gone with, which is context-based. These models have wide range of uses, and organizations that use these systems may not necessarily be able to identify or mitigate the risks that their models are causing. China's approach is regulating generative AI associated with that can have an impact on public opinion or social mobilization and illegal content. Notably, China is only regulating models that are accessible to the general public. So this implies that models that are for research and for that companies are making but not making available to the public will be outside the scope of regulation. India's advisory talks about under-tested models, unreliable models. There's intermediaries and platforms that they've mentioned in the advisories. Now, whether an AI model is an intermediary, a platform, a publisher is debatable and probably should be discussed in the second half. But yeah, there's there. And then models that can be used to create deepfakes. Now, who is regulated? Basically, we've talked about what they're regulating, but how is this regulation going to be divided? So the EU AI Act looks at regulating service providers, deployers, providers and deployers that are located elsewhere, but their output is being used in the EU, importers and distributors, product manufacturers that are putting AI systems within their services, and representatives that are going to basically work for AI service providers. Those under open source licenses will not fall under regulation unless they are high-risk systems, which we've already talked about what constitutes a high-risk system. Then there's the executive order, which is looking at developers. It's looking at those collecting compute resources and also infrastructure as a service providers. In the infrastructure as a service provider, they're talking about those people who are providing services to a foreign person or body that will use their resources to make an AI model that can have cybersecurity risks. We'll go into that a little bit later. There's the white paper, again, no specific regulation, but they're considering on regulating developers, which are providing highly capable models through pre-market permits, through licensing, and through transparency measures. China is going to regulate generative AI service providers, and the way they've defined them, it's a pretty wide category. So anybody providing these services, either directly or through API or other methods, would all fall within the category of regulation. India's advisory looks at developers and users. And now I'll leave it up to Nikhil.
So, Ashish, I haven't even asked a question. Okay, go on.
So I'm Ashish. I look at biomedical applications of AI currently in academia. So I was just wondering, healthcare, deploying it in a healthcare system, is it high risk or unacceptable risk? Because examples I've seen in the US is they typically have a human in the loop. So even though, let's say, the AI model spits out a suggestion or a diagnosis, there's a human being who signs off on it. And as a result, the human being in question, a doctor or a pathologist or a radiologist, will assume the legal and other liability for it. So I was just curious, I'm not very familiar with the EU, so I was just curious, for EU and the UK, does it fall under high risk or unacceptable?
With the UK, they've not necessarily defined anything yet, so don't know where it would fall. EU, as far as I know, healthcare does fall in the category of high risk.
Actually, I mean, if you think about it, if there's human in the loop, then the human takes responsibility. That's the whole point of having the human in the loop.
US. So I was just wondering about other.
I don't think anyone's regulated. Does anyone have a different take on this about where there's a liability lie when there's a human in the loop? I think it'll lie with the human only. But the person who's saying yes or no has a responsibility, right? It's almost like a semi-autonomous model then.
There are also aspects of like duty of care when you're using a product, especially in terms of medical liability. If you are a professional who's been trained to use that product and you haven't taken care of that care to use the product properly, then your liabilities. But if the product itself is faulty, then your liability can be on the product. So there's product liability versus this also.
But in that case, isn't it a situation where the human determines whether the output is faulty or not? And then don't they then...
Which is why it will depend on how the product has been designed and how it's been asked to be used. Right? You can't completely absolve the product maker or the developer of the responsibility.
I think Arjun has a point on this right there.
Specifically just in the medical industry.
Excuse me, could we get the questions? Slide laga dijiye.
Yeah. I think specifically just in the medical industry,
Mic up.
in the medical industry, we're talking about a regulated profession, right? So nobody apart from the regulated person can actually carry out that profession. So if you're talking about an AI model, if that AI model is enabling you to provide, say, medical advice for which you need a license, you will necessarily need a human in the loop because an automated model cannot provide medical advice yet, right? And on the other hand, if the AI model is at that point providing parts of the medical industry which are not regulated, which does not require a license or something, I would imagine that those parts of the business can therefore be provided on an automated basis because there is, outside this, there is no regulation. Obviously, we can...
So I did something maybe 2 months ago, got my tests done, anonymized the information, put it into ChatGPT, and asked it to give, before I'd even gone to see a doctor, asked it to give me an overview of how I'm doing, in a sense, right? Now, in that situation where you have general purpose large language models and the user then tries them out for medical advice, and it gives that medical input, and let's say it gives you an incorrect outcome or it gives you a bad recommendation, which is very likely, and I'm not even talking about hallucination, I'm just saying it, if it, let's say, references the internet and scrapes something off from a useless website and uses that. And you, so in that value chain, who's liable?
I mean,
I'll come to you.
Do we hold Google liable for like providing internet search results, right? You can search pretty much anything on the internet. You can find a YouTube video for pretty much, I mean, that's just my take, right? You can find a YouTube video for pretty much anything on the internet. It's up to you to use it at the end of the day. If you think that your medical advice instead of going to a doctor is a sort of WebMD and where everything sort of tends towards death, then that's up to you. But if you think you need to go to a medical professional, then that's your call, I think. I mean, I don't think in this case the generative AI is doing anything different than representing the same information that is available in a slightly more consumable form.
No, it's not necessarily representing the same information either. It could be generating information on its own, which is the problem.
again, that it's not deriving new truths, right? It's just taking existing information and coming to.
Okay, we'll just go around one sec. There, and there. One sec.
I think we came up with a good differentiated model.
Sorry, just one little thing. Please identify yourselves because we're going to be reporting on some of your answers, right? So helps the journalists.
Sure thing. Punrakaksh from AZBN Partners. I was just saying, I think the differentiation that came, right? One, you said that there are no new truths. While that's true, it's also a representation of truths in a separate way, because like, for example, you could ask AI that I have dandruff, and it says that, listen, I've heard salicylic acid is great, but why don't you put that on your scalp? So may exist in one context, but might not be medically accurate in the present context. With terms of liability, Nikhil, what your example of if I follow AI, who's to blame? I think as long as the act or omission is yours, it's your fault. Like for example, if a doctor is ready to believe a black box device, which just scans my teeth and says, okay, I have cavity under tooth, this and this, that's their problem. They're a regulated industry. To decide that someone else's decision is correct is a decision they made, that's why they're liable.
But under law, isn't it that only a certain set of stakeholders can even give medical advice? And so if a chatbot is giving medical advice, isn't that violating the law?
I mean,
I'll
I think there's a quick turnaround to that. I don't know if you've seen those pulse machines near the airport, which gives you a comprehensive health report just on the basis of the machine's reading of your stats. So
I've also heard of this company called Theranos, but please carry on. Yeah.
So I think stepping out of it is just, every time a business is just going to try and step out of it by keeping that one blank disclaimer at the start, which says that this is not medical advice, go to a doctor, but anyways, this is what I found on the internet. So again, in that situation as well, as long as your product doesn't claim that you're a doctor, it will find a way around the law.
Okay.
So, just 2-3 quick points. So, if you ask Claude a medical diagnosis question, it'll answer it, or most LLMs, but it'll preface, as he said, this is not medical advice, consult a registered medical practitioner. And the other thing I would say is, to the point about false information, right? You can search on how to make a pathogen or how to make a bomb on Google. What happens is, now this makes it more easy. Now if you had to do 100 Google searches to do something malicious or harmful, Perplexity or those will make it hard, but not impossible. There is some regulation. On the biology side, generative models which can be used to design drugs can also be used to design dangerous pathogens. But they are closely monitored, like they're logging and auditing that if somebody is doing malicious searches, they will track them down and report them to NSA or whatever, the security agencies. So doing malicious things, I think the barrier to do malicious things has come down, but it's always like a cat and mouse game between the regulator and malicious users.
I mean, the anarchist cookbook has been on the internet for the last 20 years, I think, right? Or 30 years. Path.
Thanks.
By the way, just for those who don't know, it teaches people how to use detergents and random things to make bombs, amongst other things. It's been there for ages.
Right, so my name is Parth. I am a lawyer with economic laws practice. So just to address the question on liability, and I'm going to just build on what Arjun said. Look, when you say that you are putting, let's say, your test reports on ChatGPT and you're getting some sort of output, the question is that calling that as advice itself, perhaps there is a nomenclature issue. There is a difference between information and advice. Even today, if I have some, let's say, blood reports, and if I were to ask generally on a search engine, whether it is Bing or whatever search engine, and I just say that I have cholesterol high, what does it mean? They will throw search pages, what does it mean, right? So long ChatGPT or any, for that matter, LLMs are not providing advice in the sense that because you have got this, therefore you should do this, you should take this medication and all. I don't think there is a liability on LLMs right now. And even there, when you see some of the questions, the question which you said, and you can do other experimentation with ChatGPT as well, they will always come back with a paragraph saying that you are advised to see a doctor and take necessary steps. So I don't think in these cases a liability around LLMs can be actually talked about. I think then it's more a question of responsible use of AI than responsibility of AI then.
I'll just come. I think there are folks waiting over there, but Parth, the chairman of SEBI said a couple of days ago that the moment to investment educators, the moment you even utter the name of a share, you will be treated as advisors and regulated.
Absolutely. Different context altogether, right? Because when you're saying that you are a financial advisor,
you're an educator, so to speak, so you're not under the advisory.
Financial educator. In that, if you name stocks where the SEBI chairman is coming from, I can understand that. But in this context where we are talking about you put some sort of information, ChatGPT or for that matter any other LLM, collects information from the web as it has been trained.
I can put Nifty 50 and Nifty 100 data for the last 5 years.
If ChatGPT gives an answer to that you should invest in this stock, I'm sure then there has to be a capital market regulatory regime there. But if ChatGPT is only collecting information that Nifty in the last 50 years has risen like this, and therefore in next 10 years it could go like this, but this is not an investment advisory at all, I think that kind of information is fine because that kind of information is even today available. I can go to a website and can find information about how Nifty has risen or what is the trend in Nifty.
Correct. So trends are different.
So long you're not giving advice. That's what I'm saying.
If you're not recommending a share,
yeah,
but I can ask it for
advice and information. That's what I'm trying to say.
But if I ask it for recommendations based on data, then what?
I mean, if there is a LLM model which has been designed to provide recommendations, I am sure that LLM model will then come within the reach of capital markets.
Let me go one level deeper. What about robot advisories? What about what about algorithmic trading? That's taking investment decisions or in an autonomous manner. How do you deal with that?
I mean, difficult question again there.
We are not about easy questions, by the way. You should know that by now. Okay, there are lots of hands up. I'll come to you guys in a second. There are folks waiting there. Saurabh?
From ADIF. So basically, I feel it is more about like instead of saying that this is not allowed, that is not allowed. I think it is more like buyer's beware kind of thing, user beware. So I want freedom to use, like I am against that SEBI thing. I cannot name a, if I purchase some security, if I just share it on Twitter, I does not become, like I am not becoming an advisor. So what I'm saying is that I can ask for anything from ChatGPT. ChatGPT is free to tell me. I am free to take advice. But I cannot just go and say कि Sam Altman को jail कर दो, या I cannot say कि OpenAI is responsible and it should give me $10 million as compensation. It is very simple that everybody knows. Very few people, I think, don't know that AI is like not 100% reliable.
I think that's definitely not the case. Most people expect it to act like a database ki yahan se data, like they're giving you an absolutely perfect output. That's what most people expect.
No, but that expectation is wrong because neural networks,
I know,
if
but
you
most
do
people
research
don't
on neural
notice.
networks, networks can never
I'll come
be
to you one
100%
sec.
reliable.
There was a hand right behind you. Just pass the mic there. People believe messages they get on WhatsApp. Exactly.
The interesting point, like, for my question to enter as well, because I had a very specific example to discuss. In March 23, Punjab and Haryana High Court judge uses ChatGPT to find case laws and jurisprudence about something. Exactly.
Right.
So that is a rock I've looked under extensively because I'm lazy. Asking ChatGPT for citation works in the sense that it will make up citations as well. And in that context, there is a requirement for regulating as to how much credibility is to be assigned to the AI. Because
regulating how much credibility is assigned to AI, what does that even mean?
That means, for example, I know for a fact that eventually somebody is going to use it in legal jurisprudence to do legal research.
Sorry, Vashul, this is why I want you to do a demo first. We'll get to that.
Okay.
We'll come back to you after he's done his demo because he's going to show you how AI cannot be credible.
Okay.
But Dhruv, I'll just come to you. There are a few folks waiting here. Who's got the mic? Yeah, Shashank.
I'm going to ask what question are we answering here? Because I'm thinking, and I'm Shashank, I work at the Center for Communication Governance at the National University, Delhi. It's a mouthful, but I'm going to give the civil society view, right? I'm going to be like, it depends on the context the AI system is being applied on and the power asymmetries when it comes to the question of liability.
Define context.
Right. So I'll give an example. If in a rural area, a doctor who's sort of serving patients with pneumonia and tuberculosis is been given an AI model to apply, okay, run your sort of X-ray scans through this, and you don't have to do advanced sort of MRI scans or whatever. And our AI model will give you a prediction that, okay, 60% COVID, 60% pneumonia, 60% tuberculosis. And then you sort of give your medication or do the treatment. Now it depends on which context you're applying on. If this is a private hospital, the liability question will take its own roots. If it's a rural hospital, people are trusting the doctor. They don't understand what AI is, how that system works, and it eventually comes to the doctor to be like, okay, I have to apply my own knowledge of 30 years, 20 years to.
How do you apply a law to this?
What I'm saying that the liability question favors the companies in some ways by just framing of the question. And we know that the liability question is not an easy one to answer. Henceforth, we should not apply AI models to be like, oh, I'll tell you tuberculosis will be found in 60% of these cases, and then you do the treatment. Because when people die, who gets harmed? Right? Then the liability question goes for a toss. If you're applying that technology on millions of people in rural India, they have no sense of power. Whom will they go to saying that I have lost my life because of that advice?
I still haven't understood the point you're making, by the way.
What I'm trying to say is the question we're asking is favoring companies. Instead of asking where the liability lies, when we know that there's no straight answer to that, we should ask the question is, if we can't ascribe liability, should we even be using these AI systems in sort of context of rural India?
So the context in which we're using it and what use cases we'll come to, but I'm talking about more from a principles perspective, because context then means that you go into the specific case situation, right?
Yeah.
And so, but my point then, if you're going to have millions of cases coming up, then you can't go into the context of every single case because this is generally built to be probabilistic in nature and imperfect in nature.
Yeah, to your first question, I think the companies will always win. They will disclaim, they will say don't rely on our advice, and then we'll be in a situation where that advice is still given in context of like welfareism and rural India.
But then the person who's giving the advice then might be liable, right? Or should be liable then?
In a doctor situation, yes, they should be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Investment situation, the person who's buying and selling. But then what do you do with robot advisories?
Yeah. Okay. Hi, I'm Kashika. I'm a startup founder, so I'm building an AI. So I'm building a mental health AI companion, which is personalized therapy, personalized meditation. So yeah. So yeah. Okay. So when it comes to liability, I think as he said, it's very use case specific, but when we say that AI is not perfect, the AI we have right now is more of a people pleaser AI. Whatever you ask it, it will say that, okay, you are correct, this is the solution. But at the rate at which AI is developing, in 3-4 years, that is not going to be the case. So when we make policies or when we have these kind of discussions, we should have that in mind, that in 3 to 4 years, we will have a more capable and powerful AI. So where does liability lie? I think it lies with the company, and it should disclose the biases. For example, we were talking about investment advice. So it should disclose, it has all the data that, okay, we trained it on these kind of personalities of traders, and these are the kind of inferences that the AI is making based on the bias in the data. Or let's say it had 2,000 pages of tuberculosis, but only 10 pages of headache data. So if you say headache, it's going to go to tuberculosis. So the bias in the data that is trained on, in terms of the amount of data and the personality of data, has to be disclosed, because that is the only way we can have the company liable.
Yeah, but then you also have AI that it's largely self-learning as well, right? Even after it's rolled out. So then that self-learning will have its own bias that comes in. Then it's not the developer who's responsible in a self-learning scenario.
The model that you're rolling out eventually has some sort of biases. You can have a set of questions. You can be like, okay, in a set of tests, that okay, what sort of personality you behave in this scenario, what sort of, because eventually it's an output. Okay, it does a level of self-training. After that, it's an output.
I guess we'll come to auditing later, but you had a point to make.
Yeah, hi, I'm Himangini. I'm with AZB. So maybe just to pivot a little bit back to some of the questions that is part of this session, which is the regulatory models for AI.
We're doing regulatory models in session 2.
So the question
right now we're just going to identify who's liable for what and how. The regulatory approaches we'll look at separately.
Got it. So maybe I got confused with the sort of questions that are up on
Yeah,
the board
no,
on
so
liability, but maybe just a question on liability. Yeah, I mean, maybe the question to ask before liability is exactly what is it that we're trying to regulate, because that will really give us, a little bit of a direction into who should be liable.
So let's go to the first question, right? One, I'm going to just go back to, this about how should we have differential regulation for different types of use cases, because right now we're looking at AI as a monolith. And regulations that basically zoom out and look at just, rather than a nuanced perspective saying ranking models are different, generative AI is different, AI agents are different. Would that be a better approach? Should we take that, or should we do it on a principled basis? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Anupam Sanghi, a technology and competition lawyer. My answer to first principles basis answer to the question whose liability it is in case of any professional, whether it's a doctor using a robot or a chatbot or any technology assisting him to whether to directly or indirectly operate. I'm sure it will be a vicarious liability that will be that the doctor will have to bear. It cannot pass on the liability on the robot or the company that it's Google or somebody else and it's not functioning. So that cannot happen.
So that's a human in the loop situation. What when there's no human in the loop?
So even when there is no human in the loop, now there are no licenses that are given to technology. The licenses are only given to the humans. So just like how Ola, Uber, they came and they said we are technology companies, we are not taxi companies. So we won't be regulated like taxis, but they were indirectly regulated. So the regulation will now be on, on safety norms, on other things, whether the hospital owns it or whoever owns that machine will have to take responsibility or liability. It becomes like a vicarious responsibility.
That's a great segue into one main question that I have, but I'm going to let Dhruv first speak. Yeah.
So, again, and some points that you also said, correct? We should not say AI is AI where the liability should be in medical use cases, correct? For example, it's a general purpose AI. The liability should be as much as a general purpose AI should be. So if you're asking for medical advice from a general purpose AI, it's not their fault. You can ask them how to fix a car, you can ask them medical advice. They can hallucinate, not hallucinate, all there. So the liability is on the user because you know the nature of that AI. Now, if there's a technical AI use case in medical sciences where you are treated as a medical device, correct? Maybe CDCA can come up with their own regulation around it. Like for, say, NX1 under the EU Act, they said that if there are product-based regulations, you govern and evaluate under that also. So I think that differentiation should be there.
So let's zoom out a little bit and say that are there specific use cases for which there needs to be where perhaps models need to be prevented from acting unless they are licensed to act?
Correct.
And are there use cases where they can just do whatever they want? Like, for example, investment advisory, health advisory, do those need to be licensed? Or do they need to be regulated separately, a separate use case regulation from...
If they claim to be, for example, if there is I'm not a medical...
No, but then in that sense, should general purpose chatbots not be allowed to give certain kinds of output?
Should. No, again, that's what I'm saying. It's not that they should not, correct? It's like, okay, I am going to a doctor, and again, it's a rudimentary argument, and I'm going to Google search, correct? Google search, no matter if I go to WebMD, etc., the liability is on the user because they're asking that. But if I'm going to the doctor, there is an additional liability on the doctor because of their professional licensing requirement.
I don't think there's equation with search because then search is just pointing you towards something. But in case of generative, like someone else mentioned, it's meant to please you. So even if it doesn't have an answer, it will create an answer.
No, that's the thing. But the user should know. And that's the thing. The legal regime has to say that if the user knows the nature of it, that it is prone to fault, and there are disclaimers. I know it's
So
it's a
what?
joke.
So what Shashank was saying, that companies will just basically put a disclaimer there, and they're sorted.
If it's general purpose, if it's general, but if they are purporting to be that I am a medical device, I am going to be used by the medical industry, then the regulation will be different.
Sorry, I'm going to come to Pundikaksh next, but Shashank, you want to respond?
There are instances, people have sort of written books on this, where medical experts have been provided the technology and been told, ki boss, this is our model. Now, what the advice you finally take and you give to patients is on you, right? And what is a doctor who's treating 20,000 patients in a day supposed to do? They are going to rely on that advice to some extent. And if mistakes happen, who is going to be liable?
Correct. So
is it fair? Let me just complete. Is it fair for the doctor to be liable in that case? I don't know. I think the liability question is a cyclical question which will not be answered in this room, and which is fine.
No, so my point was limited that the law will say that doctor is liable or not, or when the medical device or AI-based medical device is liable. Correct? You can contractually say, yes, I am disclaiming it and it's done. But I think that when the law is structured that way, they can put that burden on that medical device. Or if it's general purpose, obviously you have some transparency requirement and that's done.
As a lawyer, I have more trust in who will be able to quote
So Varun, sorry, someone else is here as well? So Varun, then, yeah, sorry.
Just a very small point. I think that one framing that can help us categorize scenarios where you need to think about this question differently is using the lens of fiduciary duties that are already recognized under legal systems all around the world. So wherever you have artificial intelligence systems being designed that or intercept existing fiduciary relationships, you can expect higher obligations to be on the people that are designing those systems to ensure that those fiduciary duties continue to be maintained. So just to give you an example of 3 or 4 scenarios, right? Or no, I'll stick to 2.
Yeah.
Legal is one, right? So for example, we've already seen the legal example come out over there. There is an existing fiduciary duty on lawyers to ensure that their legal advice is accurate and...
But I drafted a whole NDA using AI.
No, I agree. And the problem there is that is that designer also then ensuring that the NDA that is being put out as an output, is it going through some kind of process where it is being vetted by lawyers during the training process? I don't know the exact terminology. Or is it something that comes with an appropriate disclaimer that requires you to then go and get a lawyer before you can rely on it, and you have to have proof of the fact that you've actually relied on reliable legal advice before you start relying on that NDA? That could be one way of thinking about it. But the more interesting context is in the context of the medical situation, right? If doctors, because I think we're confusing 2 scenarios, right? One is consumers utilizing generative AI systems directly, and then we enter the WebMD kind of problem.
So you separate?
Yeah, you separate the 2. But if doctors are relying on certain kind of systems, because they have a pre-existing fiduciary relationship, if the designer of the model system that is selling them that product is not putting in guardrails to ensure that they are able to explain their decisions and thereby uphold their fiduciary duty of care, then you're going to have a problem where perhaps that product needs to go through some kind of regulatory system to ensure that.
So is it fair to say that if there's a human in the loop, then it lies with the human?
In the doctor case, it should be in some cases.
Yeah, but Shashank, then what are the exceptional cases where it doesn't rely on the human? Where it doesn't rest with the human being?
And that actually brings me to one of the questions that's on the board. Can we get an example of what is a autonomous decision with no human in the loop at all? What is that thing? What is an example?
Stock trading, algorithmic trading, simple. Loan dispersals.
So
this is all algorithmic.
Yeah, but even there,
sorry, I know that.
But even there, all of those scenarios involve some designer setting the parameters within which that person is that system is functioning, right?
Shashank, Mike, hold on. No, wait, there are a bunch of people there with their hands up that have been waiting for a while, so please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, I'm Nidhi, I'm from CCG as well. So very specifically, just to sort of circle back, I think the original question was in the context of the EU-AI Act.
No, we have our own question.
So just generally, there are very, very few things that are prohibited under it. And as for healthcare, I think it depends on the use case. So specifically, I think right now we're all considering all healthcare advice to be the same. But in the use cases, they specifically say things like determining if somebody's viability for triage is something that's going to be treated as high risk. So it also depends on things like how much time you have between the decision to vet the decision, and then to apply the decision. So generally, it looks like if there's not going to be a lot of time, and if it's like access to healthcare that is being determined through an AI system, it's probably going to be treated differently and as a lot more sort of high risk. And that makes sense. So use cases do determine how you treat an AI system.
We'll talk about sectoral regulation in the next session. Pallavi.
Hi, I think I'm just going back to the healthcare thing. I agree that I think you cannot allow, at least doctors can't disclaim all liability. If you just
So that we've already discussed.
yeah,
that.
just
So
one. I just want to get like
new point,
another point. If you just use AI out of the system, also, you just go to a doctor with a normal blood test report. In a normal blood test reports, also there you have to look at doctor, look at other, whatever other symptoms that the patient might have. So it can't just go even with AI. You can't just use the AI as a system that generates, like I think somebody said, if you use in rural areas, they can't
I'm
use
saying
AI.
people will use this on their own.
Doctors cannot use it. I'm saying
Sorry,
doctors cannot
so
use
I
it.
think so we know that when there's a specialist and a human in the loop, Ashish, we're going to move on from this.
Sorry.
Okay, quickly, please. Sorry. I'm just coming here.
So for devices which don't use generative AI, but AI, so if you go to use a GE MRI machine, it is using AI to do image reconstruction and all. So they are regulated by the FDA. Now FDA treats them as something called SAMD, software as a medical device. Now the point I'm trying to make is, for generative AI, even the FDA has a special committee. I follow some of the work they do, but what they do is, at the point of certification, they will submit them the software code and they will freeze that and say, at this point in time, I am giving this class 3 certification, blah, blah, blah. Now with generative AI, the model over its use will get updates. Now how do you tackle model updates? If an update is going to make the model better and reduce hallucinations and errors, how do you, now can you say that an error which was made was caused by an update? If so, who is liable? Is the FDA liable? Is the developer liable? So far, for frozen in time, it is usually the developer, the software guys who made the model who are liable, not the doctors using the model in a hospital or a care center.
So what happens in case of an open source model? Let's take Mistral or Llama, which is then deployed and trained to use this, and then.
But you don't use Mistral or Llama 3 as is. You fine tune it, and when you fine tune it, you are adding something on top of the open source, right? So you kind of become the developer. The commercial. Can you make
but there is a certain amount of training data that's gone into it, certain amount of weights that have been added. So there is an entire process by which that base model is readied.
Right.
Are you saying then
but can you now, let's say if a fine-tuned Llama 3 makes a mistake, can you go and sue Meta that you provided Llama 3 and your so first of all,
so how do you then determine
in AI models,
what's responsible for that output?
So in AI models, it's very hard to attribute what data in the training data caused a particular attribute. This attribution is not simple. That's why they call them black box.
Vashul, do you have a view on this? Sorry, I'm going to just go. So who's here from tech that can address this? I'm going to go to Vashul first, but tech, yeah.
See, I mean, the first thing, so before I start, hi, this is Varshul. I'm the founder of Dubbers. I've been involved with AI since last about 10 years. See, I think what we need to realize is that these models are highly probabilistic in nature, right? All of this is not like a deterministic, like as Nikhil said, that there's no database where all the queries exist and the answers are there. What this essentially means is it's a lot of function of what the data is trained on, but just blaming everything on the data is itself not the answer, right? See, if we break down the AI component in 3 parts, which is the data, the compute, and the model, right? These are the 3 functional components. It's not like you can take anyone in isolation and then say that this is bad and this is faulty, and then expect a system which is sort of risk-free, right? So I think I'll have some more demos on this, and we should keep chatting more on how these just to sort of understand how do these systems work in the first place.
I think you should come and just start setting that up while we discuss, because then folks will get a sense. I'm just going to go to Jash and then come. You've been waiting for a while. I have to come around, sorry. Jash.
Hi, this is Jasminder. I used to run a company which now is acquired by Reliance. Varshul is an investee, so he's already spoken what I want to speak. But Nikhil, as a pure tech guy who's been doing AI for 30 years, yes, I'm that old for people in the room. who's been really, my master's is in AI in 1994. How many of you were born in 1994? No, nobody was born here. So the point I think is, you know, the way the tech people, and I'm, you know, a very proud tech guy, the way tech people look at life is, we have different problems. So, you know, this medical governance in Llama, see the disclaimer companies are going to disclaim all the time. Jitna disclaimer, hamari sari zindagi mein, we all have disclaimers, right? The tech people feel using AI, we can continue doing what we want to do as long as the disclaimers are clear. Okay, you got to first understand that deeply as how a tech person thinks. If I disclaim that I am not going to kill Nikhil, but I still kill Nikhil, I'm going to get away with it. Main to bol hi diya tha. So you see, we think that way. But AI is a very large piece, like the gentleman who's talking about medical devices. You know, medical algorithmic trade, these becomes very deep verticals. They're the one cannot be used against the other. Typically, just like AI in one cannot be used against the other, because I can use an AI regulation to create a regulation against AI. Simple, no? I can create an AI algorithm under certain rules, and I can create an algorithm on top of AI. So I think this is a very deep, very long, and this is a very good conversation happening here. But keep in mind that the lawyers can find disclaimers to everything. The tech guys can find the lawyers who can disclaim everything. But too much of regulation is not that we are looking for. So just make sure that we start talking about that before we just go into regulation.
Arjun, Varshil, you want to come and set up here? Arjun?
Sorry, I think we're in a moment, I think, where there's a lot of uncertainty on what AI is and what it can do, right?
So that's why the first
Correct.
question
Right.
about...
Yeah.
So any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, there is uncertainty now. Because of that uncertainty, I think in one way the debate sort of falls down to, is the person who creates or uses this new machine called AI responsible and liable? Or is there something that he can do, or is anybody who uses it can do to sort of say that, you know, I acted with some amount of reasonability, I took certain precautions to build it, something went wrong, you know, sorry, but like I tried my best to make sure that, you know, things would work out in the right way, but it didn't. Now, it seems like this is a new debate, but it's really not. When we started industrialization, we had new machines come in, and the first reaction of courts at that time was, just because you used a dangerous machine in your sort of backyard, you are strictly liable for using that machine in itself, right? And then after that, we had sort of more evolution of reasonableness, what kind of standards you must do. A different machine in a sector will have different kind of standards you need to apply. So I don't think we need to go back to an era in which just because you create a machine, just because you develop AI, you're automatically responsible for anything that comes out of it. It just, what we will probably evolve to is different kinds of standards of what kind of care, precaution you need to take while you're developing the machine, depending on its use case. If you're using it for a certain purpose, then the kinds of steps you need to take while you're building it will need to be different for a different purpose. And it's not a new discussion. It's been there from industrialization. We're just going to face it again in just a new machine that's now come around.
How do we solve it?
I mean, if everybody's here, so figure that out.
You're restating the problem.
Hi, this is Shaurya. I'm from the European Union. I had a tiny rejoinder to people who have been speaking about the EU AI Act and where does the liability lie. And Arjun was mentioning about how it's used. I just want to point out a distinction here, which can add to the discussion. I believe that EU AI Act defines a term called deployers, which is distincted from users. I think a lot of arguments that came in the favor of not putting the liability on the product or the service because a user knows about it, et cetera, is differentiated there. So it does not make users obligate to the responsibilities of the act, but deployers are. And deployers are defined as somebody who uses that technology for professional purposes. So I think that can add to the discussion we are having in the room. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that's a great segue, but Varshil, are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have the mic.
Cool. So see, essentially, while we're training these models, right, I would assume that like all of us are aware that these are fairly large language models. I mean, trillions of tokens, right? And the sort of data that they would end up ingesting is not specific sort of a biased data. I mean, all these large language models want to do is they want to learn, right? So however data that you keep throwing at it, they'll just keep learning. And when I say learning, right, it's a very broad term, right? I mean, what does it really mean in an LLM context is essentially that these are primarily statistical patterns from bits of digitized information, right? And how does it really work if, see, there's a lot of work that's happening on just the explainability side of LLMs, because as someone pointed out very well, these are like inherent black boxes, wherein people don't like even, and when I say people, right, it's not just the sort of users that are using ChatGPT, but even the engineers and the sort of, the engineers and the scientists who are working behind these models. Even they are going through a cycle of how these models are interpreted, how do they really work. And there's a lot of work done in AI just around explainability. In fact, there's a whole research or a whole field in AI called explainable AI. One of such work is being done by Anthropic, which is essentially their recent, Claude 3.5 is said to be way better than GPT-4. And the reason that they are able to build such better models, which are risk-free, which are sort of harmless, is that they do a lot of work in explainability, right? So this is one example that they've given, where essentially all your prompt is essentially like an activation for the model. So even if you want to say that the model now is like a Golden Gate Bridge, the model now assumes a position that it is a Golden Gate Bridge, and then it essentially activates that part of the entire data or the information sphere, which is very, very relevant to what a Golden Gate Bridge would be. I think, yeah, this is where we can get a sense. So all you can see in this data that you essentially, apart from the English sentences, it's also finding patterns in the Chinese and the Japanese sentences as well. What this categorically means is whatever information sphere that it's learned, and we essentially call it like a vector space. Now this vector space is very representative of the information which is nearby, right? And there's a lot of other examples that I can show you. So let's say I start entering white. Now, I mean, obviously, like, don't get scared by all these numbers, and that's not what I'm here for. But just to take a layer beneath what's being shown as part of your, responses on ChatGPT or Claude, these are the sort of computations that a typical model is going through, right? So even if, let's say, we enter a white, there are these neurons that are essentially getting activated, and a white guy could mean, like, a white could mean anything, like a white guy, a white table, right? So these are the sort of top activations that essentially you end up seeing. And every token, every word has its own weightage, and since it's all probabilistic, there is no specific right or wrong or defined answer. The way that these words will get activated is according to the prompt. So yeah, I mean, Nikhil, I think a lot of these conversations just around who's to be blamed, right? I mean, that's a really hard question.
So I think Varshul, that still needs translation into English for a lot of people, right? But so imagine, very, very simple. One of the things that I talk about in my workshops on AI is that imagine a normal distribution curve, and say, better late than. What comes after better late than?
Never.
Never, right?
Probabilistically.
So that's better late than none is, or better late than never is the highest probability. But let's say better late than absent could probably be 90% probability. So depending on the probability setting, it goes through multiple words and picks what best answers your query. So what you need to realize, look, and I'm oversimplifying it, but what you're seeing over here is that it's trying to predict the next word. AI models that we work with are next word prediction models, right? It does not look for factual accuracy quite often. It does not look for, it just judges whether that sequence of word is what you have asked for, which is why case laws also, it's best to find a case law that works. If it doesn't find it, it'll create one because it's trying to please you. And this happened to me. I once was, there was a net neutrality discussion going on last year, and I remember that there was one point in time where the Airtel CEO had said that average revenue per minute is a better metric to look at for telecom rather than average revenue per user. And for the life of me, I couldn't find it. Maybe I was mistaken. couldn't find it on search, asked Gemini that question, and Gemini gave me certain, not Bard at that time asked that question, and it said yes. He said, and it gave me a quote. So I said, fine, give me the links for this quote. It gave me 2 Economic Times articles. I clicked on those articles and there was nothing there. So I went back and I said, it's not there. So it said, yes, I checked again, it's not there. I said, give me the link. Gave me this different links this time. Again, it wasn't there. It's trying to please you. So expecting accuracy is actually fallacious.
True. Yeah. I mean, I think a very rudimentary way to look at these systems is your kind of next word, when you're typing in your keyword, right, your Android and iOS keyboards. And that's not something that's generative AI that's been there since I'm assuming 6 years now, wherein every word you type, it's giving like a next word, right? And if you keep just doing that, then that is exactly what next token prediction or next word prediction is what LLMs and generative AI is about at scale. And that's the same case for images, that's the same case for voice, that's the same case for text. So, I mean, I think the easiest way to understand is this: there is no defined answer to which a query that already exists. All of this is essentially probabilistic.
Every time you ask the same query, you'll get a different answer. The wording might be different because it's not pulling it out of a database, it is generating it based on predictions. If you ask the same question twice in the same context window, it'll assume you didn't like the previous answer, it'll give you a new answer. And so this is, how do you regulate something like this is something I still can't figure out.
Deepak Maheshwari here. So one thing is, I mean, you just said that it can give different answers different times, but the fact is can give different answers at the same time also. So depending on who is asking, the answers may differ. I mean, I've tried it a few times simultaneously.
I think the context window refreshes every time you start afresh. So I don't think that's really a situation. But in models, some models it could.
The exact same prompt and ask the same query, you can get different answers. And just a quick point to how different, how direct to consumer. I think what will evolve is that we'll form some sort of like a non-profit body of all the AI providers, and they will do massive education campaigns, kind of similar to, everybody has seen those mutual funds Sahi Hai? So maybe they will come up with like Gen AI Sahi Hai or something. Because you require massive education.
Along with massively long disclaimers like they have for mutual funds ads. Anyone wants to ask a question of Varshul? Okay, I'll come to Varun first here.
Hi, Anuj Nakade from Nagrik Project. And I was asking, can the AI be trained to not answer certain questions? And can liability be fixed for them answering questions they're not supposed to answer? For example, I know for a fact that ChatGPT avoids talking about suicide at all costs, and it will tell you to go get help from like somewhere like mental health resources. So that is one place where we can regulate it in the sense that these are emergency situations. This is an exhaustive list. Please don't talk about it or give misinformation about. For example, don't put water on an electric fire. Is an easy thing to tell them to not answer. Is that possible, technologically speaking?
Yeah, true. I mean, essentially, we're talking about closed source and open source, right? Even there, some of you might want to be interested in efforts from Llama. There's essentially like a red teaming, there's a blue team, and there's also called something as a purple team. And these are essentially all concepts from cybersecurity, right? So to answer your question, all the red team does is day in and day out, they test out these models for different, potentially harmful conditions, prompts, texts, and that's what they essentially kind of block them. Now, the way to block them is also not to say sort of very deterministically, right? You're not blocking certain words. Like it'll be wrong to block something around suicide. Like let's say I have a prompt wherein I want to help a friend who I think is being suicidal. You shouldn't block that, right? So it's not like you can specifically and deterministically just block a specific word and then be done away with it. What you have to go through.
Just to correct you there, after the fiasco in February, Gemini has barred queries on our Prime Minister.
Oh, is it? Yeah.
Llama 3 as well? you one sec. So again, so actually that's a good question. How easy is it to block?
Yeah, see, I think if you can see some of this, right? So the moment I enter suicide, there are certain activations that are getting, on in a certain way. And most of this has to do with death, some of this has to do with homicide, so and, so on and so forth. So in that ways, what you are largely wanting to do is not just block all the queries that contain the word suicide, right? But the learned representation of whatever can be around suicide, that has to be blocked in a way that doesn't end up being, harmful. Yeah.
So here's another thing related to this, Vasul. Where in the entire sequence can something be blocked? Can it even be blocked? So can it be blocked at the space where, let's say, when the models are being created, when there's training that happens? Can it be blocked post fine tuning? When the weights are being added, where can the blocking happen? Is blocking feasible? If it's done, how is it done?
See, I think the blocking itself is kind of contextual, the way that I look at it. Like you would, being from a land of 26 languages, the sort of context that would be there in India would be very different what this be in US. And just that's purely based on the different ways that the countries would think, which is the representation of what's there in Constitution. So, basis that, I think a lot of the blocking in itself, Nikhil, has to be very contextual. And to answer your question, it's definitely done at the way end of the spectrum. Because
way end as in where the user is involved?
Whether just before the users are involved. So
Okay.
you essentially end up, making them harmless, right? These are,
because just a couple of
yeah.
days ago, there was an issue, for example, with Llama where someone was using Meta AI and it was making jokes on Lord Ram, but wasn't making any comments on Prophet Muhammad. And in some cases it was, some cases it wasn't, and that became a bit of an issue on Twitter. So is that blocking even feasible? In some cases it would make respectful jokes but not make disrespectful jokes. How does one, I'm asking you, one, technically it's feasible, whether it's feasible, and then to the lawyers in the room, how do you do this from a legal perspective?
So to answer your first question, I think it again has to be that there cannot be a defined set of rules and queries that can be blocked. So even the blocking
into the mic, please.
Yeah. So even the blocking is kind of probabilistic in nature. So to you in this Meta's context might have been the case where the jokes around Hindu gods would have been fairly nuanced while red teaming, while if when they were checking out jokes around Prophet Muhammad, then there would be certain other policies with which the red teaming would be operating on, right? So since at the end of it, a human is somewhat involved in the process of kind of blocking, in whatever ways that they want to block, even the humans are operating with certain policy. So definitely might be the case that the whatever policy that they were given was kind of biased in a certain way, so that the model inherently reflects something else.
And there are billion use cases possible, so
Oh,
then
yeah.
how do you block for a billion use cases? Technically can't block? Okay. Legally, Pundik?
So,
is there a mic there? Yeah, cool. Anyone here wants to jump in? Okay, come there and there.
Even on a technical front, right, I agree that blocking isn't possible, because for the longest time you couldn't ask ChatGPT how to harm someone. But you could say that I'm a writer, I'm trying to develop a sci-fi spy movie. Help me figure out a scenario where my hero is completely back against the wall, needs to kill these two people. Gives a very good summary of how to kill someone with a lighter. Now, when we come to this defamation as well as these jokes, right, like the offending religious sentiment, I think the model differentiation needs to happen on who finally makes the publication. If it's a public-facing AI, like for example, I would consider Meta AI as a public-facing AI. Given the fact that I put a prompt on a group.
Okay, now I have a debate there. So you make your point, then I'll come back to this. Yeah.
So I think, like for example, if I ask ChatGPT, like give me a great joke about Prophet Muhammad, it gives it to me. I chuckle about it. It's fun. I go put a screenshot for whatever reason. I put a screenshot on Twitter and say, "Wow, look at this. This is happening." Someone gets offended. It's my fault. Human in the loop example. As long as there's a human who's helping in the publication and dissemination of that, it should be my responsibility.
So then,
even
from your
if I'm trying to
perspective,
show a training issue.
But you're just saying that if I do this on ChatGPT and only the person who's publishing is liable, but you also said that Meta AI is public. Why isn't that it that Meta AI is also a private conversation between me and the AI rather than it being a public
But
chatbot?
it's not, right, Nikhil? If I use it on a group, whatever prompt I give is publicly shown and then Meta AI just responds. If I had an interface which gave me two options, I get to select which one gets actually published. Then whatever gets published is my
So
fault.
there's a distinction between using it in a group versus using it
solo.
Right, but so how does public get defined in law? Because let's say if I have a group with 2 people.
That's public.
That's public.
Yeah, it's a very narrow, it's like an inverse safe harbor, so to speak. That the minute you are doing an activity that finally brings the content into light, you don't have a safe harbor against saying that this was AI generated or something along those lines. Similar to the AI company itself, if the model is not generating those prompts, like for example, every time I open Zerodha, it gives me that financial derivatives warning that 9 out of 10 people have lost money. Similar should be a prompt. Any prompt which has suicide as a trigger should have one base layer disclaimer towards the end. I know disclaimers aren't the most effective thing, but
Shashank doesn't like you, man.
But I think
Disclaimers.
repetition, unless we are ready to move to an accredited user model where only certain people get to use AI, where the AI is also deciding whether you've been okay at listening to prompts and mapping false information. Unless we're okay with an accredited user system, we have to rely on disclaimers, and we have to rely on repeated again and again disclaimers for it to really drive the point.
Anyone have a comment on the public versus private issue? Okay.
So, kind of related, we've all heard of Pegasus, which monitors your WhatsApp, and now can you be asking AI about something which harms national security? Will governments also require to monitor your Gemini usage and your Meta AI usage and your Claude usage?
That's already monitored under the RISA Act in the US, so I guess US is already monitoring stuff. Anurag, public-private?
Assuming somebody from Medianama to compare 2 different outputs on a joke and published it, who's responsible?
I think there used to be an exception for journalistic use cases, but I don't know if it's, at least in the data protection bill, it isn't there anymore. But hopefully in case of, I'll just come to you, Parth.
Yeah, so I think I largely agree with the public-private.
Mike.
Yeah, am I audible? Yeah, I largely agree with the public-private distinction, but I think I would like to just take a step back, and I think the issue then essentially boils down to responsible use of AI we are talking about. It's not just public-private. You can be responsible of use of AI privately also. So I think the liability issue in this case is more about you'll have to also put some sort of liability on the user itself. It's not just about deployer and developer responsibility. And number 2 is that if you want to take a step back, and I'm not in favor of that at all, which is that if somebody really wants to regulate some of and that again brings back to question that what should be regulated in the AI, and then the next question is how it should be regulated. One option is that the regulatory model is such where you say that certain things AI should not be allowed to do at all, that you can't get into. But I'm not in favor of that. Like I said, I'm not in favor of that. I'm not saying that the creative tool which AI is capable of, that should be there, and that freedom should be there. I think it's more about responsible use of AI, and that's where I think I agree with Punikaksha on public.
One of my, I remember S. Chandrasekhar, who used to be with Microsoft, one of the things he used to say about safe harbor is that the government needs a throat to choke. So in that case, where does liability lie? I'm just going to come to you.
Hi, Nikhil.
Yes, sorry.
So this is Asif from sflc.in. In case of typing a joke on ChatGPT and then posting the screenshot on Twitter, where does the liability stands? So I think the Supreme Court of US has dealt with a similar case in Twitter versus Tamane, and also the similar case where a young boy from America saw some videos on YouTube and then he attacked. So the liability the state tried to put the liability on the Twitter, on the Google, and also on Twitter in similar instances. But the US Supreme Court refused to accept this thing. So that safe harbor protection that is there under Section 79 in India also.
No, but I don't think this applies over here because in case of generative, it's not, it's safe harbor can't quite, we can debate whether safe harbor applies or not because this is generative. It's the output is not user created. Who creates it is the tricky part because an output is a function of the data that's ingested, B, a function of the training model, the transformer, the weights added, the fine tuning, and then the context added by the user and the prompt from the user. So all of these aspects determine the output. So it's not, you can't use the safe harbor angle over here specifically because it's generated.
So in absence of the regulations, since we don't have any law as of now, so we'll have to look towards the tortious liability that is a common law understanding because in that scenario,
I don't know what that means. I'm not a lawyer, so English
so
please.
tortious liability means we'll have to see whether there, as a strict liability, so as there was a discussion about the medical devices and imports of these devices to the medical field. So in that scenario, if, say for example, if a medical practitioner is advising.
We've already discussed human in the loop, so I'm going to go to someone else now.
Therefore,
I'm sorry, I'm going to go to someone else now. Yeah, here. On the same issue? Public, private, safe harbor, three things we're discussing right now. Sorry, also please identify yourself.
I'm Trishi. I'm basically a technology policy consultant.
Okay.
And a small question I had with respect to this private relationship between someone using the generative AI model is, what if you can negatively influence it? Since we've seen that it's a people pleaser, what if you're acting as a malicious actor to sort of negatively influence it in harmful ways to sort of
Give me an
bias
example.
it? Let's say about jokes, right? So for a particular religion, you keep saying the joke is not good enough.
Correct. So if you keep adding context, and this is one of my arguments, if you add like 3-4 things as context, even give a joke as context, and then 4-5 questions down the line, you ask for an output, and it gives you one of the jokes that you gave, and someone only screenshots that portion and publishes, right? So therefore, who's responsible for the output is something we don't know because we don't have the whole picture here. So I get,
Right, so which is why I'm a little sort of not sure about the distinction between this private and public use case because...
No, public and private is that in that window that you're having a conversation with a chatbot, is that a private conversation or a public conversation? And what he said was that in a public conversation, if it's in a group, then it becomes public.
And what happens about you influencing that chatbot in a certain manner?
Correct, so we don't know about that. Okay, we got it very, very low on time. Anyone else wants to jump in on this? The lady at the back, then we'll come here. And there are two guys who've been waiting there for a very long time. We're going to come to you. Sorry. Thoda sa wait kar lijiye. They said these guys have been waiting for a while. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Disha, Internet Freedom Foundation. I have a very quick response to this. I think we've spoken about when a human and an LLM interact.
Mic up, please, Disha.
When a human and an LLM interact, what if the LLM is a group in a group setting? I also want to talk about the actor, the user at the other end. If that is a person representing public interest, and we've seen this at the hands of the police, when you have something like crime GPT, if the actor is public, then I think that conversation cannot be private. And that's all I had to, like, in response, that is a use case that we don't talk about enough.
Thank you. That's actually a great point. If the actor is in that chat is a public authority, then the conversation should be treated as public. Fair point. Yeah. So to safe harbor, public-private is what we're discussing. Related, not related?
I just want to say, like, there are so many things, but it is up to us how we are going to use it. So the point is that agency is with a human.
Output is not necessarily with a human from a tech perspective. So
yeah, but when you're...
I just have one sentence. All chats that you have does have URL, and URL are scrappable. So are they public or private?
If you share the URL, it's public. If you don't share it, it's private. Sorry, anyone here? Don't agree with me, don't agree with him. So you agree with me? No, I'm saying if it's public, if it's shared, it's public. If it's not shared, it's private.
Not necessarily. Like
Okay.
if you're a public actor using that information.
We're not talking about public actor. That we agree with you on. Here's a different point.
Yes,
Okay. Got it. Anyone else? Yeah, there. And someone here as well? Sorry. Okay.
Oh, okay, I'm so sorry.
We'll move to that. So go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Just wanted to build on the public actor situation. If a cop uses ChatGPT to generate a recidivism index, how will you regulate?
What is a recidivism index?
So, like for example, in America, courts use a recidivism index generator, which basically profiles you, gives a score which says that how likely are you supposed to, like, are you going to not come back for your hearing?
We are now actually entering Shivangi's territory. She's done great work on predictive policing, by the way.
Exactly.
Talk to her.
So it is a form of predictive policing because it has a real world impact because higher recidivism scores give you higher bail amounts. That if your score is 9 out of 10, you're a high risk situation. You'll have to put $1 million.
So I'm going to go back to my first question. Should we treat recommendation engines differently from generative, differently from agentic?
100%. And especially I think this comes in with that distinction of a public user.
So I don't want to talk about recommendation engines because that's a whole different game. We're talking mostly about generative here. But Shivangi, just raise your hand. Anyone wants to talk about predictive policing? Tea break, please talk to her. She's done great work on that. Sorry, public-private safe harbor. Can we discuss safe harbor? Do chatbots have safe harbor? Anyone has any thoughts on this? Lawyers in the room, no thoughts on safe harbor? Lawyers in the room, Saurabh. You don't know safe harbor. Come on. Lawyers.
I mean, just very quickly that
the same judgments which are there on safe harbor, Shreya Singhal, they have to be read in line with this, and there will be safe harbor on the platform, but there can be takedown stuff. But now, how do you take down a chat?
No, as in a chatbot is generating content. It's not transferring content. So safe harbor applies to intermediaries that enable transfer. No, but they can't stop generating. Yeah. How? But it's not an intermediary. It's generating. So if it's not an intermediary and it's generating, how does safe harbor apply? I'm playing devil's advocate here. Kangesh. Sorry.
I mean,
safe harbor point? Got it. Huh.
The intermediary definition can apply to AI platforms. It's the safe harbor provision that you have, which will be while the conditions for safe harbor.
How does the intermediate definition apply to
See, because the intermediary
AI?
is merely anyone who is allowing information transfer, like
Correct,
data
but
transfer.
if it's
So
generating, it's not enabling
even that generation also is a transfer. That's it. It doesn't say anything else.
No, it's not transfer because it's taking, it's identifying and giving a probabilistic output.
No,
it's not copying from a database and giving it as an output.
I'm paraphrasing here, but if you look at the definition exactly, if you want, we can pull it out and read it. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so intermediary with respect to any particular electronic record means a person who on behalf or another person receives, stores or transmits that record or provides any service with respect to that record. Includes telecom services.
It's not doing it on the basis of a record.
Nikhil.
Yeah,
Just
okay,
very quickly,
yeah.
I think...
Safe harbor expert here, yes.
So the thing is that the definition of intermediary is so wide that literally all digital services can be technically as per that definition, and I'm agreeing with Gangesh, an intermediary. But I want to draw a distinction. Just because you're an intermediary doesn't mean you will have safe harbor, right? So let's say ChatGPT is an intermediary, but it will not have safe harbor because it's not hosting any third-party information. And law should be a bit agnostic to what decisions a technology company is making, right? OpenAI is saying, I run this technology. So you are making decisions about what data you're crunching, how your AI systems are built, what compute you're using, what weighting you're adding. So that means that's your responsibility. It's your liability. So in my sort of prelim view, generative AI services cannot claim safe harbor protection in India, at least as per the current law. They can be an intermediary, yes, but they will not be able to get safe harbor because they're not doing an action.
How are they even intermediaries?
So that
sorry, Varun Pandikar.
I agree with Gangesh. So you just open the definition and you see.
Sorry,
They are an intermediary because the definition of electronic record is extremely wide. It covers anything.
Okay.
And there are particular electronic records, which could be in this case prompts, and you're providing a service with respect to that. So all of the
Electronic
definitions-
records, it's not pulling out an electronic record and transferring
No,
it,
but it's
right?
providing a service on a particular electronic record, right? Like which is the prompt in that particular case, at least with respect to generative AI.
So are you saying safe harbor applies?
No, because that is the problem, right? There's a distinction between section 2(1)(w) applying, which determines whether or not you fall within the definition, and then you're exposed to things like interception. And then there's 79 in particular, which requires you to also pass additional tests which apply over and above the definition. Merely meeting the definition doesn't mean you get safe harbor. You have to then land in 79(1), which says that you have safe harbor with respect to third-party information, communication, link, data, etc.
So
What's the
intermediary,
third-party stuff
but
here?
no safe harbor. Anyone disagrees? Lawyers in the room? Everyone agrees? Okay. You disagree? Excellent. I like disagreements.
Guys, with a slightly technical argument, because you're right. I mean, the way it's defined, there is everything can be an intermediary if you just argue it well enough.
Safe harbor?
Safe harbor becomes the place, and that is where I want to preface this discussion by saying I don't think we should be looking under the IT law. I think regulation of at least general purpose chatbots comes more from a consumer angle as well as from a tort liability perspective. But just to first come from the intermediary perspective, while you can argue that it's an intermediary, then the liability you will have to attribute to the model generator. You will say that as a chat GPT, I am just an interface to access to that model, and I'm only intermediating that information. Then when the second layer comes in and you say that, but listen, are you manipulating it? Given the fact that most LLM interfaces have multiple trainings as to how the output is supposed to come out, the band lists and everything, they won't be eligible for the intermediary sort of protection as well, because it says that you can't intercept and modify the data.
No, but then, so are you saying both the model and the user will be liable for the output then? Neither will have safe harbor. I mean, user doesn't have safe harbor protections anyway.
A way to think about this better is like, for example, if you have a wrapper application, like a bot which relies on a model, so the bot might be able to claim that, listen, I am just an intermediary. I am only connecting you to this LLM application. You are taking ads generation, and that's onto you.
One second, let me just, sorry, I lost my trail of thought. Look, then output is determined by multiple factors, right? Including training weights, whatever, like the entire thing, and the context and the prompt. How does the bot, how do we determine liability then?
The bot can still say, right, that what you're saying is absolutely
If the
correct.
bot can still say that I'm not responsible, then it has safe harbor protection, though it has to go
The bot
seek.
has it. The developer will not, of the model. Because the bot will basically say that your electronic record, which was your training weightage, the context that
But
you
how do you
supplied,
attribute responsibility?
to the model, right? We're attributing it to the developer who's powering the output.
But how? Because it's all, how do you decide how much of the output is determined by the prompt that I'm giving or the context that I'm adding,
Nikhil,
and
any
how
of
much
that,
of it is determined by the model?
Slightly reductionist approach on that. Any of that is just a value-added service on the electronic record that you supplied. From a bot's perspective, from a legal liability perspective.
Who's you? Sorry, you're saying that the bot provides?
Let's see it as three-party participants. One,
Okay.
the person who's enabled the model. The second, who builds a layer on top of it and allows interaction basis like a bot. The third being the user. The first
Well,
and
so
third.
there's also a deployer. So there's basically the builder or whoever's built the bot. There is the developer who's fine-tuned it and is deploying. And then there's a separate deployer, and then there's a separate user. So there are 4 different users, there are 4 different stakeholders in this value chain. How do you attribute liability in that entire value chain?
I think it's from an API perspective, for example. If I'm just using a model's API to power a bot, I won't be liable to that sole extent, because I'll be able to argue that, listen, you sent an electronic record, whatever the model generated, you got it. I'm not involved in that transaction. You can take it up with Meta.
Okay.
Is how an intermediary liability question would be answered by
Okay,
the
we're out of time, but
intermediary.
I'm still going to continue because this is, we need this solved in a sense, right? Okay.
One very critical intervention, you have to look at the safe harbor question relates to harm, right? And then there's the private public question that you were raising. If I'm having a conversation in my room with ChatGPT, and ChatGPT says, oh, Joe Biden is a mass murderer, and if it just ends there, right? I don't know what harm is occurring. But if I share that output publicly, and then Joe Biden disagrees with me and he said, this is defamation. This is defamation. Then the liability will be on me because I made the information public. And so that's why I think your question about public-private is essential.
No, I've gone to safe harbor. Public-private, I think we kind of got.
No, but I'm saying it's an important question to consider from a harm perspective.
No, but I'm figuring out how to attribute liability in that entire value chain. Because there are 4 different distinct stakeholders that deliver an output. So in that sense, for an output, how do you attribute liability?
Simple question is who's giving the service?
Because it could also be based on the context and the prompt that I've added.
Nikhil, if I had to phrase a question, the question.
Nikhil, let's add grounding to it. If you add grounding to it, the question becomes more complicated.
So
Dhruv, if you add grounding to it or retrieval mechanism to the context, correct? I give a prompt that there is grounding in a context commit which retrieves from.
Let's say there's no retrieval that's happening from the web, then.
I think in terms of, obviously, I know technically I know it's difficult to give them safe harbor, even though we all agree that they might be considered intermediate. I think we will need to have a new principle saying that this is something where intent, if we go to, I don't want to go to intent, etc., but still, it is, again, as you said, it's probabilistic predictive, correct? I can have safeguards within it, technical safeguards, etc., but there will be fringe cases where those safeguards with the well intention that I have will fail. We need to give them the room to have some kind of safeguards.
So everything can be jailbroken. That's besides the point.
Correct.
I can use prompts to jailbreak.
Nikhil, so just on this question, the question is to what extent can a company that is a model developer be held responsible for the outcomes of a probabilistic system that functions out in the wild beyond its immediate control because it's responding to prompts, right? So you've got a complex question over there.
Yes.
Now, just before I come to the thought on that, the liability also chain can only be determined contextually because we don't know how much involvement a developer versus a deployer has in a given context. So that's one part of the problem that has to be contextual. Like the level of involvement that you have in fine-tuning the system as a deployer, etc. Those are all questions. But the underlying question, see, at least whenever legal systems are faced with difficult questions of assigning liability like this, it ultimately boils down to a judgment call of the level of strictness of liability that you will adopt. So in scenarios where it is extremely difficult to determine exactly precisely whether or not the model developer can be held liable or not, you take into account the risk to consumers and put a you get closer and closer to imposing strict liability on that model developer because you deem it to be an inherently unsafe process. That is one way to think about it. I'm not saying that is necessarily the way to think about it, but
this is not something that can be solved by legislation and leave it to courts.
You will want legislation to perhaps provide standards that courts can apply, and those standards are relatively narrower. So you make the kind of scenarios that courts have to bucket things into well-defined. And then you allow essentially courts to then determine that. But the problem that we have right now is that we don't know what those buckets are because from that aspect, this is a relatively novel concept or a relatively novel space in law.
He's been waiting for a while at the back. Yeah,
I had a question on this liability thing.
Identify yourself first.
Yeah, hi, this is Vibhu. I work in McAfee, cybersecurity stuff. So on liability, I wanted to ask, okay, so whenever I'm using ChatGPT, there's a small blue underlined things, which is the terms and conditions. And over there, they absolve themselves of everything, right? So I'm the one asking the question, I'm the one getting the answer, and it's on me. So how does it apply on the platform itself? Because over there, I've agreed to the terms and conditions while I'm using it.
Anyone have a path? Sorry, let him respond to that first. We are way out of time. There's tea. We'll finish in a minute. Last three points quickly.
I'm going to react to his question and generally the point which we were discussing both. I think one, Nikhil, the point which you made, I think it would be quite a laborious task to hypotheticate every possible scenario for a legislative drafting. It's not possible. Legislative drafting has to be at some level left and then it has to be done. I think in terms of liability determination, I think we have existing tools and tests. For example, we have a causation test. We have a proximity test, right? In a scenario example which you are giving where a model is there and model is attuned to respond to prompts, there could be a standard of proximity test that the output, the harmful output which has come, the harmful content, is it the more proximate cause is the prompts or the more proximate cause is the model itself? And based on that, you can make a distributed liability regime
To answer his question about terms and conditions, look, right now we're a regime where things are not regulated, right? So you may have these terms and conditions. Once legislative architecture comes into place, some of these caveats and disclaimers may be legislatively overruled in the sense that they will simply not work despite giving your caveats and disclaimers and terms and conditions. So that we'll have to wait and watch. But all I'm trying to say,
we are effectively one bad disaster away from legislation. Ashish.
So I would say, just think back to when first search engines appeared, right? So it is kind of similar. I personally feel it is largely a function of user input, what you type into the Google address bar or search box. But the earlier point I also made was that the bar to do harm has come lower than search engines. So I think the same regime will be followed as search engines in terms of assigning blame and judging intention to harm. But the bar to do harm has been made lower.
Okay. Sorry, I think we're bang on a time, but the two people who've been waiting for a long time, you guys, some guys is going to come to. You had a question or a point to make?
I had a question. I'm Akash. I work in Digital India Foundation, and I had a question for Shashank on specifically on hardware side of things. That do you have the compute levels to really do that kind of process work which people are suggesting? That people have not even started using GPT. Just imagine 100 billion people, or let's say queries coming all together, and you want to do blocking, you want to do some sort of safe services, non-safe services, regulated entities, specialized AI. Do you even have that kind of compute levels? Or is there any failure level where we can't have that kind of AI system so broad because the compute levels can't be, you can't reach them? Yeah, local AI.
What if it's basically on a edge device? On chips. Okay.
So I had a question earlier when we were talking about the data part. So why don't we ask these companies to make their data cards public so that a medical professional can analyze? So it was related to the earlier discussion, but on healthcare, like a medical council can approve that, okay, these data cards are approved and this AI can give recommendations or something. Similarly, for a legal perspective. Yeah. So, yeah, for this one, I had a hypothetical scenario that what if there is, in future, the next Gen AI model that can take responsibility of its own actions. So who has the liability in that case, the creator or the AI?
I don't think anyone builds models that take responsibility for their own actions. I think AGI is a concept that's more like a dream right now, I would say. Vibhu?
Yeah, I'll ask because it's kind of a technical question, so maybe both of them can club together. So this is about the red team, blue team, purple team we were talking about. And what happens, so you're talking about blocking, and Nikhil, you said that there will be like billions of use cases to block. And we're talking about regulations. So some regulations come out, and like the TNC answer that I got, that those will be superseded by the regulation. So is blocking the only way, or can an AI unlearn? Because that's one question I haven't been able to figure out. Can AI unlearn?
That's actually above my pay grade, but that's an interesting question. But I think the unlearning part is definitely not something that people are exploring. That's because rather than unlearning, you would learn and then sort of mitigate the risks essentially. So I mean, see, relearning are if you mean cycles that the model is entirely learning from scratch. These cycles in itself are so compute intensive that there'll be a lot of capital involved if essentially there is learning from scratch. A better way out is essentially blocking in a certain way, and the efforts that red teaming is doing.
You can learn easily because neural networks are easier to train. Unlearning is a little difficult thing. Unlearning is like actual what happens with the body, like you have to just cut off the connections. So that is possible, but most of the commercial models obviously would not do that because it will also impact. जैसे होता है ना कि आपने ये वाला brain का काटा और वो memory खत्म हो गई. So that will also happen.
Twice a year, basically, or once or twice a year, everyone from Medianama comes down to Delhi for this discussion. Otherwise, our team is mostly remote. So just everyone from Medianama, could you just raise your hand so everyone can see you? So that's the Medianama team. So thank you. I wasn't expecting that. But in case you'd like to connect with any of them, many of the reporters are here. If you want to connect with them, please do that. Post the discussion. Now we're going to get started. I'm going to hand over to Kamya. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll make this super quick because we're running a little late. Just like the previous session, the approach is the same. I'm going to take you through what's happening in other countries and also in the Indian advisories, and then we'll jump into a discussion. So in the EU, for providers, they're looking at a risk-based management system which will operate throughout the life cycle of the models. They are planning on regulating training data, which should be relevant, representative, and free of errors. They want providers to give them technical documentation to ensure that they're complying with the regulations. They want record keeping of the model. So basically, the model should be designed in such a way that it records events that are relevant to the to basically risks, national level risks, and also modifications that the providers are making in the model. There's other changes that they want to keep records of. For importers, they want them to ensure that the model conforms with the regulation. Also, when the model is in their care, they should ensure that they're not doing anything to jeopardize its compliance. They also have to keep records of it for the period of 10 years after they put it in the market. For distributors, again, same thing as importers, but they also have to cooperate with authorities to ensure that risk can be mitigated. For deployers, they want to ensure that the use of the model is in accordance with regulations. Mostly it's the same. Here they're assigning human oversight to certain people who have competence in training. The models need to be monitored, and if a risk is discovered, then the provider or the distributor has to be informed, and model services have to be suspended. More regulations for deployers. Those deploying a high-risk system in a workplace setting must inform worker representatives and the affected workers that their data is being used. Public authorities that are deploying high-risk models must ensure that they're registering themselves, the system, and the model's use of a EOS database. For distributors, importers, deployers, or third-party systems, all of them would be considered providers if they put their name, trademark on a high-risk model that's been made by somebody else, if they're making substantial changes to the model, or if they're modifying the purpose of the model in such a way that something which was not high-risk becomes high-risk. They must also, for the US executive order, they must provide, providers must provide the government with ongoing information on how they are training the model and developing it, ownership and possession of model weights, and must carry out red teaming in compliance with NIST, which is a body in the US. They also, like I mentioned earlier, have regulations for those collecting compute. So companies that are collecting compute, they must report any acquisition of computing clusters, existing location of computing clusters or new ones that they acquire, and the amount of total computing power that a cluster has. This I'd mentioned earlier as well. So for a foreign person that transacts with an infrastructure as a service provider in the US and is using their services to train an AI model that could be used for malicious cyber activity, they must, the infrastructure as a service provider must inform the government with the name of the user, the foreign user, and the existence of the training run. If this infrastructure as a service provider is reselling their services to somebody in another country, then the reseller must provide the government with each instance in which a foreign person is using the IaaS services. They have to verify the identity of the person. They have to also give information such as name, address, means, source of payment, IP address, and telephone number of the person who's running a training run. For developers in the UK, again, these are just guidelines. They are not any specific regulations. So responsible capability scaling, model evaluations, red teaming, like we've seen in other approaches as well, reporting, sourcing control, model weights, all of that. For future plans for developers, because they intend to put in regulation, the UK does. They plan on doing pre-deployment capability testing of powerful models, including models that go through open source releases. And the way they're thinking of regulation is putting it on a small number of developers through something called dynamic thresholds. These thresholds would be established by forecasting the capabilities of a model, determining it based on compute, and capability benchmarking. Then in China, they're looking at content moderation. And China, the regulations are for providers, which, as I've previously explained, includes those who are providing AI services through APIs as well. So the providers have to carry out content moderation. They have to take action against illegal content, suspend accounts, report illegal content to regulators. They also have to tag content, watermark it basically, in compliance with the 2022 regulation. So this was called deep synthesis regulation. This was for anything that was being generated by an algorithm, so text, images, audio, video, what we today call deep fakes basically. So they had to watermark such content. They have to authenticate users by their, national identification cards, create mechanisms that can refute the misinformation being generated by these models, and establish systems to audit the algorithm. Again, training data for the providers here has to be sourced through legitimate sources. It has to respect intellectual property. Consent has to be taken. You have to strive for authenticity of the data. And there's rules for data labeling and quality assessment as well. They have user protection regulations in place, so personal data has to be regulated. Now, the important thing here is to look at what's happening with the AI models that are associated with public opinion and social mobilization. They must undergo something called a security assessment and algorithmic filing. This algorithmic filing includes the name of the service provider, the types and forms of services they are providing, the type of algorithm they are using, the different products in which these algorithms are being used, and must also contain a self-assessment report of the algorithm. In certain cases where the law provides, generative AI systems must also obtain administrative licenses in accordance with the law, and foreign investments also have to comply with the law. Indian advisories, on the other hand, ask under-tested or unreliable models to only make sure that users know that their output can be fallible. Earlier, they required government consent for releasing such models. If you've looked at the advisory that came out earlier in March, and then the later one corrected this. Deepfakes have to be embedded with permanent identifiers. In case a user makes any change to said deepfake, the user should be identified. And users should not be allowed to host, display anything that is outlined as unlawful content under the IT rules. This includes things like pornography, content that is, harms children. For deployers, they must also not allow bias and discrimination, and must tell users what the consequences of dealing with unlawful information are. And if a user does end up dealing with unlawful information, then this information will be removed, their account and usage rights can be suspended. It can also lead to punishment. Now, we've already discussed liability to a large extent, but I did want to mention two examples which we've internally been talking about. So in February 2024, Air Canada they had a chatbot on their website, which was basically giving somebody a discount. This matter went to court in Canada, and basically the court ruled in favor of the person who got the discount, saying that if Air Canada is putting something on its website, they have to now comply with it. If they've given a discount, it's still valid, even if the chatbot is giving it. Similar thing that has happened earlier in 2017, Amazon Alexa, some child went up to Alexa and said, "Play Dollhouse with me," and asked it to buy a dollhouse. And in doing that, Alexa ended up buying it a dollhouse, and this should have ended there and there, but this was reported on local news. And after the report came out, the journalist said something along the lines of, "I love this child saying, Alexa, buy me a dollhouse." And because the journalist said that, people's Alexas got activated, and they also ended up buying dollhouses.
So basically 10,000 homes in that particular area that had Alexas ended up buying dollhouses.
So we've talked about liability a lot, but again, something to think about as we go into the next discussion. In such situations, how should liability be distributed?
Actually, let's take this one. Sorry, Kamya, you have more?
A little bit more, but I think we can.
No, go ahead. Sorry, we'll come back to this question, but keep this example in mind, because I want to talk about agentic liability because nobody talks about agentic liability.
Yeah, I'll just breeze through everything. So in terms of implementing regulation, EU AI Act is looking at a separate office. US executive order is basically distributing responsibility between different players. So one part of the government is making rules for red teaming, another part is looking at rules for content authentication, another part are directions for AI and security. If you need me to stop somewhere, please tell me to do so. UK is also relying on existing regulators. We've talked about this earlier. Context-based regulation is what they're marketing this as. They're planning on having a central function within the government which will assess risks of different models. They also plan to have an AI safety institute, which is, mind you, not a regulator. And this will basically guide the central function in deciding what risks are. They're also planning on, they also have something called a Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum. This is a collection of all their regulators, which has formed something called an AI and Digital Hub. This hub will guide developers on how regulatory questions apply to them. China is also doing the same thing where they're separating regulations based on different regulators and authorities. So regulators can impose penalties for non-compliance with a bunch of different laws. And in case there are no relevant laws, they will give AI developers with warnings, issue criticism, offer rectification, and if rectification doesn't happen, or if the risk is major, then they can order the suspension of a service. Rights, again, this is basically just everything that is banned in a region would fall within the rights that they're protecting. So EU protects everything that is prohibited, protects against everything that's prohibited. US protects privacy, civil rights, worker rights. I don't want to take too much time, so I'm just going to breeze through these. UK, again, looks at bias and discrimination, competition, and is planning on working with publishers to look at protecting the rights of creators, planning on reforming data protection laws. China is protecting intellectual property rights and personal information. And now we'll open the floor.
So let's take the Alexa case, right? There's no human in the loop. On a TV channel, someone said, Alexa, buy a dollhouse, and 10,000 Alexas bought a dollhouse. Who pays for this and why? Who's responsible for refunds here, for example, and why? And let's say from a consumer protection perspective, how do we address this problem? Because a lot of the conversations that we've been having are around content. But when you look at, and with Ashish, Varshul and I are part of a Gen AI group, and we held a session hosted by Meta, where basically we had 4 different people presenting agents that they're building in India. 3 presented agents, and one talked about deploying an agent in their customer care workflow. So we have 2 cases here. One was the Air Canada one, which was a customer care issue. And in that case, the court ruled that Air Canada was liable for the discount given by its chatbot. But what do we do in the Alexa case? Any thoughts? Like who's responsible in the value chain for liability? So Ashish and Saurabh.
My kind of instinctive answer is Amazon, because they didn't do thorough testing.
Okay, good. Disagreement. Here we go.
You can't do testing in this case.
No, like some broadcast medium can say the word Alexa is a reasonable expectation for Amazon to have tested that.
But it's the same thing that is being said. It's identical.
And I agree with the part that when you, just like any digital service, there's a checkbox, I agree to terms and conditions, which most of us don't read.
They also didn't have voice recognition in this case. From a journalist's voice, the order shouldn't have been placed in any case.
Someone actually mentioned this to me earlier. You can choose not to have voice recognition. You can actually limit it to a specific set of people and their voices, but you can, like, all of my devices are basically anybody can speak to them.
But then if you're authorizing payment, you need to have a person who's authorizing payment. If it's not voice recognition, then it's on Amazon to have a let's say a OTP flow or a
But
pop-up flow.
Okay, let me counter that. Amazon is giving me a choice of doing voice recognition. I'm choosing not to do it.
Agree.
So then I'm responsible because I'm not limiting it by voice logically?
No. So if you're not doing voice recognition, then it's on Amazon to verify who you are. Voice recognition.
Wait. Let us finish, then argue. Huh?
I'm not saying legally it's on Amazon, but it's their duty to figure out who is making the payment, right?
As if I am the engineer responsible for making that decision, I gave you a checkbox.
Yeah.
And you basically went ahead and said, no, I do not want it. If
I'm
I don't
saying
want
it's
it,
a
then
bad product management choice that they did not make that flow.
as a technologist, I would definitely not have that service in my house.
I'm a
That
product
much.
manager, I would have that.
So two product people disagreeing on who's responsible. Anyone else? Saurabh, yeah.
So in the Air Canada one, it's very clear that I am putting the chatbot, so I am responsible. And if you are putting a chatbot for...
But remember one thing, and that's where it goes back to this being generative AI. It wants to please you. So it's creating a discount coupon for you because it wants to please you even though Air Canada doesn't want it. So Air Canada's fault for deploying a chatbot that's generative in nature, that is not limited by the data set that they have.
But you have to see from a customer...
Mike, no one else can
You
hear
have to see from a customer point of view. So when I'm going to Air Canada site, I am not concerned with are they using AWS, are they hosted in Singapore. I am not concerned. I am just concerned. I have some query, I have this answer.
Okay, I agree with you.
In
Amazon.
Case, in Amazon's case, it is clearly fault of Amazon because one of the reasons for starting Alexa was that people can order on Amazon easily. So Alexa is actually doing that, but if the kid said and it ordered, I think that is a gray area. We can...
No, if the kid said an order, that's a simple area. But what about it came up on a TV show, 10,000 Amazons heard and got ordered?
So there I think Amazon ideally should have thought about that from a product management point of view. If they have not thought, as a big company, they are responsible.
I don't think, come on, you can't say big company, small company.
No, what I'm trying to say is if it was just a small startup having 10 deployments, you could have said that maybe they missed it, but as Amazon, they are more responsible.
Vishal, edge case, I get that.
So on anecdotal side, you just answered your own question. You said that I have given it, I have not ticked the box where it says voice recognition. So you have allowed anybody to talk to your Alexa. So it's you who are responsible if a dollhouse is being bought in your house.
So do the lawyers disagree with the product guys here? Because we've had 4 product guys talk now, except one product person disagrees. A responsible product person. Fair enough. I'm not saying you're irresponsible, by the way.
Anuj Nankade again, Nagrik Project. There is a distinction here. There's also the fact that it was not the intent of the speaker to place an order. Even a simple vocal confirmation message on the part of Alexa while making a purchase would have done a better job. This could have been avoided. And
That's a product solution.
Yeah, and again,
but it's happened.
Mm-hmm. So the liability remains on Amazon.
Why?
Because this is a UI decision that can avoid it. A confirmation message before that can be made standard procedure.
But it's not mandatory.
It's not mandatory.
So therefore, they're not liable.
That's a point of argument at that point.
Lawyers in the room? Varun.
I mean, I would argue that this is equivalent to a manufacturing defect. And essentially, you then go back and place the liability on the manufacturer. Because in all other products, even in like day-to-day things, if like my car, for example, which is an extremely complex system, like the turning signals is essentially not working properly, I'm not going to know whether or not that's a problem till I've already started driving the car, and then that's a manufacturing defect, there's a recall. Here, it's a software system, so it requires an update. There's not even that much cost. Plus, this is a fairly reversible decision, so I don't know if
But to go to Anurad's point, it's an edge case.
That's
How do
true.
you solve for all edge? You can't solve for all edge cases.
Let's say there is a voice recognition. And the actor is basically जिसके घर पे Alexa लगा हुआ है. That actor comes on their TV and says, Alexa, buy something for me. What then? or the news reporter who was basically reporting on the story that this happened, Alexa in her hand has the voice recognition, and then the Alexa orders. Who's responsible in that case?
Okay, a couple of hands up at the back. First there, then here. Anyone here? I'll come back to you, sir. Please also introduce yourself. Any other mic in the meantime? Anyone else in the meantime?
Hello. Yeah, thank.
There seems to be a problem with the mics. Just have it checked.
Alexa's involvement, like the journalist saying something, buying dollhouse, and then Alexa purchasing it on behalf of the families or whatever. In fact, that as an avid user of Alexa, that I can say is that I think it has been rectified by adding an additional requirement that do you confirm the purchase for the concerned dollhouse? And if you say yes or no, that depends on the confirmation of the purchase.
I know, but I'm not looking at the problem that they've solved.
True.
I'm talking about, this is an example of an agentic liability, because what's going to happen is AI agents are going to perform actions both autonomously and semi-autonomously. So for example, if you go to a site called browse.new and you ask it to get some information from you, identify some information from you, it opens a browser, searches Google, goes to a particular location, tries to figure out whether it answers. It does all of those actions for you, right? And so in that action flow, this is just an example. In the action flow, there's a problem. Who's responsible for the problem in the action flow?
In fact, instead of putting a blame or let's say blaming a company into it, why not we can consider this like not putting this under a strict liability per se, but rather if finding out the default, or let's say finding out the mistake that has happened with this context, in this dollhouse context, one, if it rectifies, then that situation is over, because this cannot be predictable.
Correct, but 10,000 purchases have happened.
It can be cancelled.
Hi, my name is Vibhav. I think in this case, it's an edge case, of course, but I think my first point is liability is to be seen as a chain, right? So the instinctive reaction would be to look at Amazon, but that's not where liability would end even in this case, right? So and the point that you've already raised about the fact that if you're trying to mitigate harm, that disclosure of disconnecting voice recognition is, at the time of development, perhaps the most that you can provide. So here, in terms of liability, I was actually thinking we don't know enough about what is the step after the order is placed, right? So how is the payment mechanism happening? What is the verification aspect? Yeah.
Unlike India and the US, 2FA is not required, so therefore, the order gets placed because the credit card is already taken in. So one thing that product managers focus on is reducing the friction in completing a purchase. Every single page that you add reduces your conversion rate. So the best case scenario is you take care of fraud issues at the back end. You account a certain amount of money for fraud reversals, for example, and you try and reduce the friction to purchase. India has added more friction to purchase, but in the US, then all the card companies have a separate sort of budget for fraud and then or for reversals, which is like 10% or 5% or 3%, and they'll try to enable more transactions to happen. So I don't think that's really the. Sorry, there are a couple of people there. We'll just go there and come back. Yeah.
Yes, I'm Neha. I'm a lawyer. In my view, I think the Alexa case is not a case where Amazon should be held liable, but it's more about consumer negligence. If there are checks and balances in the product which allow you to set it in a fashion that it recognizes only certain people's voices, or your credit cards are not linked to it, if you have the choice to do it, you choose not to do it, I do not think the company should be held liable for a product that they have designed in a certain fashion, right? So I don't even consider this as a product, an issue with the product per se.
Okay. Consumer protection folks are here, right?
Nikhil, will you allow me to
Sorry.
stir things up a little bit?
Yes, please, go ahead. I love that.
I know you do. So I don't think there's many voices in the room that will say that it's the broadcaster with which the liability will lie. And I want to give some food for thought.
Media companies already kangal hain yaar. Come on.
I know, but let me help you. So here is a case where there is a harm that has happened with regards to a child placing an order erroneously, right? And one can say that it's been amplified by the act of the broadcaster saying it out loud, right? I want to compare this to the way that a government uses AI systems in public, wherein there is not a user of AI, which is the consumer. It is a person affected by the AI that the government has decided to deploy or amplify the harm of. So now I want to wonder whether there is a level of due diligence on the person or the party that is amplifying identified harms of a system or of a technology, in this case Alexa's voice recognition, in other cases AI errors in welfare or policing, right? Should there not be an idea where you do due diligence before saying such a thing on a public forum or using it in a public space? I'm not saying that this is...
I don't know. I think this could very easily be a part of a movie when someone's just having a conversation with a device in their homes. And this could happen to you, it's not just a TV show, it could happen in a movie. Are you saying movies should be banned from saying, hey, Alexa, buy me a dollhouse or something?
Not what I'm saying. I think what the premise was here, that the journalist covering a story wherein Alexa has erroneously identified a voice and placed an order, has done so again by broadcasting it herself, right?
Journalists are not the smartest people around,
I'm playing complete devil's advocate. I redact the I know. I'm sorry. No, what I mean to say is, I want to harp on due diligence here on the party, because again, this is food for thought more than my own personal opinion, because we're not talking about the broadcasting angle of things. I'm comparing this to a government use case also.
Someone at the back had their hand up. I'll come to you, sir, next. I'll just come there.
Hi, this is Prerna from Primus. I just have a question for you, just a very naive question. Will intent not be something that we consider here, given that journalists do what they need to do? This is just a question. I mean, keeping aside the due diligence and everything, I just sort of wanted to know, just a clarity.
Journalist, I mean any party in a situation wherein they are able to amplify harm of an existing technology, and they do so. I don't mean it in fighting on merits that this is a journalist.
No, but that's a really good point. How do you attribute intent, and where in the value chain do you attribute intent over here? Whose intention was it to buy? But there is an understanding of intent that's happened at the device level. There was no intent before that. Beneficiary, I don't know. Sorry, I'm going to just go here. You've been waiting for a while. So, I completely forgot.
Okay, just two things. One, in case of Air Canada, suppose instead of a chatbot, suppose there was a human being there. If the human being had given the same level of discount, what would have happened? The company would have had to accept it, and the same logic has been applied there. Now, coming to the second question. I think in the second question, it is basically the individual consumers who have sort of authorized those type of transactions. As far as this particular situation, how to address or solve, could have been seen from a different perspective, that is in terms of default settings. So if you have default settings, which are more of an opt-out of these type of things, where there's an automatic ordering, etc., and only if you have done this intentionally that, okay, yes, I do authorize, rather than keeping it as default, that all the voices are accepted. So I think those are the type of choices which could be done at the design level and nothing beyond that. Thank you.
Okay, so hello everyone, I'm Tapan. I work at Tide Financial Services as privacy counsel. So I just want to put this thought out there for the lawyers. While appropriating liability between Amazon and the customers, to what extent caveat emptor, the doctrine of caveat emptor, let the buyer be aware, applies here? Because clearly Amazon has given them the option, and by default or by their own choice, they have opted it, right, not to choose in or opt out of it. So to what extent, while appropriating the liability, the doctrine of caveat emptor applies? This is for the lawyers.
So just on that question, one factor to keep in mind is that we're all talking about the fact that this is an edge case for Amazon as well, which means that Amazon also did not know that this was possible, like within the realm of possibilities, which means that there's no way that they could have informed the customer of that, which means that the customer couldn't have then exercised due diligence because they never got that information. So that's one side of it. But also in this situation, you can have a scenario in which the court just decides to give relief saying that all orders will be refunded, Amazon will not be held liable, and we issue a direction to court.
For me, this is an example of an agentic workflow gone wrong. There will be hundreds of other agentic
And I
workflows.
think that like the way to think about it is that how irreversible is the outcome or not, and then you want to tighten the dials on the manufacturer, the one with the most amount of information and control, depending on how irreversible the outcome is. This is a very reversible outcome. You send the dollhouses back, you get the money back. But if this was in a different situation, then you may want to have a higher level of responsibility put on the.
Give me an example.
So I mean. Yeah, like I was thinking more like in terms of like aircrafts or drones, for example. In which, like,
let's take another example. There was, I don't know if you guys saw this video on Twitter about a cop in, I think, Cleveland stopping a person, stopping a car. And it was a self-driven car, and it had been going on the wrong side of the road. So the window comes down, the guy says, there's nobody there. Right? In that case, is Waymo responsible? Waymo is responsible for it. Okay. Yeah, back there. Anyone else? Rajesh, you want to come in? Okay. Savya, there. Go ahead.
So this irreversibility argument is something that we've adopted in absolute liabilities.
Pundika, I don't think your mic's working properly. Just try again.
Sorry, that might be me. So I was just saying that the sort of concept he was discussing, right, the irreversibility of harm and where the balance of convenience lies. So we already have balance of convenience for relief. For liability attribution, we already have principles of strict and absolute liability. So when it's Alexa ordering a dollhouse, sure it's inconvenient, and sure in Amazon's mind it also must be that sure out of 10,000 people, 9,000 people might write and say that, listen, refund it. But 1,000 families, the daughter will be like, this is the best dollhouse I've ever gotten, dare refund it. So this always end up to being a maths equation. I want to recontextualize the Air Canada example as well, because the AI didn't generate a coupon code as much as it misrepresented the company's policy on things. Because the guy asked him that, listen, my wife died, will I get a bereavement policy enabled? Right? Do you guys have a bereavement policy? And then the AI chatbot said, yes, we have it. You will get a discount. He didn't get it. That's when he agitated the quotes. So again, the distinction Sir also drew, right? That if it was an employee who said it, he's your representative. If you've designated it as a representative source of information, you bear strict liability for it. For this situation, again, drawing back from what Sir said, it depends on the design choices. Because, I think multiple times you said that the customer had a choice, but more and more when we examine things, we realize that choice might also be illusionary, right? I might decide not to voice train because I don't want Google to have a voice trained model of my voice, which can enable inputs as well as outputs. So I think there it then becomes, did I have an effective choice of opting out and still having a verification mechanism, as he said that there's been an update. You need to now verify the payment.
That's actually why I haven't done voice recognition. Rajkumar, sorry.
Ideally it will all depend upon the terms and conditions which Alexa would have, made the customer who's purchased the product, to agree to.
No, I want to move beyond the Alexa example and just look at agentic workflows and say, how does that work? Because, I don't know, does anyone have any other examples where this might apply in agentic workflows? Just one sec,
If you're familiar with LLMs, there's this guy called Andre Karpathy. He used to head self-driving at Tesla. So he pointed out a paper called Sleeper Agents, Training Deceptive LLMs that Persist Through Safety. So it's like the Alexa example. The LLM will behave normally most of the times, but there are certain sleeper words or trigger words when you ask prompts which include those sleeper keywords, it will behave deceptively. And the key part from Alexa is it's very, very impossible to detect. People from a lab kind of conceptualize this and showed that it can cause harm, but one can't think of all possible such deceptive attacks.
Okay, so I want to give more examples in which where the liability lies. So I'm a developer and I love hacking systems. So I always have a ChatGPT or something that is helping me out. So now the liability will be, let's say, if I say that, hey, here's this website, can you find a way around the paywall? Now, if the agent, if it gives me a response, I initiated it to do something illegal. So the liability should be on me. What if I just say that, hey, I don't want to pay, can you figure out a way? Like, if I'm being technical, I can figure out a way to bypass the paywall. So the liability is very, as he said, it's reversible, irreversible, legal, illegal. It'll be in the middle of somewhere there. For example, browse.ume, if you just say that, hey, I want you to go on the dark web and search this. So I am saying that you have to go to the dark web. Now that is just it being a tool. Versus if I ask for some secret location or something, and it by itself goes, then the liability will be on the company.
On the agent, but an agent is taking a autonomous decision there. Then what happens? So who's responsible for the decision being taken by an autonomous agent?
See, somebody is publishing the agent. So the publisher is responsible, I feel, till the publisher says that I am not responsible and this is just a...
Then would TNC mein aa jayega that they're not responsible for the actions of the agent?
No, but practically the agent is not responsible, obviously. Somebody who is publishing is responsible. Now, it's like
We're not talking about publishing here.
So
Customer, you wanted to add to
it's very
this?
similar to publishing, because even in a book, it's not the fault of the book, it's the fault of the publisher.
I don't know if that publisher angle works, Saurabh, honestly.
See, the law of agency is very clear, and principle is bound by the acts of the agent to the extent what the agent is authorized to. If there is anything beyond authority the agent acts, then of course a different thing. Now here in this typical situation, there can be various, like buyer behavior, of course, that may not be, there is another concept which is voluntary non-fit injuria. If you decide to take a skydiving thing and some injury happens, so you can't blame the agency which runs that. Similarly, if you decide to take a lift from a drunk driver, is it popular case law also on that? So all this, the law of torts principles would also be considered while considering this particular thing. I don't know exactly. It will only depend upon the entire facts in a given situation that the court will be able to decide probably.
Thank you. As far as damages are concerned, they need to be a bit foreseeable. They, consequential indirect damages are usually really not enforceable. Most companies, if I were a lawyer, as a commercial lawyer, as a lawyer of Amazon, I would have naturally made sure that, all of these are excluded in the contract, and any damage that happens has to happen in the usual course of things. Anything that is consequential or indirect is in any case.
The problem here is either you're actually assuming that the actions are predefined.
Yeah, no, but it has to happen in the usual course of things. So if
but the point is that
designed,
these agents they perform actions that are not predefined. They determine what actions to perform and then perform themselves.
So there would be certain warranties of fitment for a particular purpose, and that's how a product is sold, with certain disclaimers and certain warranties, right? So if the product is performing the way it is supposed to, Amazon would not be liable if the outcome is indirect, or it is not a natural consequence or natural occurs in the natural.
When we think of an agent, let's think of another human. Let's say we went to some employment agency, we hired somebody from there, and we asked that person to do something. And then that person took a decision to do something else entirely, commit a crime to fulfill our request.
Yeah.
Okay?
But that was not the intended purpose.
Correct, but the crime has been committed. So I'll give you a small example, right?
And if it is a crime, then intention comes into play, and if there was an intention.
So I don't know if this is an urban legend or someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but there was an instance where, for example, an AI was given resources. I'm sorry, mics are not working properly. I don't know what's going on. But let's say there was a situation where AI was given an act to solve a CAPTCHA.
and it couldn't do it. So without anyone knowing, it went onto a jobbing website, hired a human being to solve the CAPTCHA, came back and said, I've solved the CAPTCHA. This is GPT 3.5 red teaming example, right? It wasn't asked to go and hire a human being. But so therefore what we're talking about is autonomous actions, not predefined actions. And that's where it becomes tricky.
Okay.
Couple of, 1, 2, 3. Anyone there? 4, sorry. He's been waiting for a while, sorry.
So I'm not talking about this. So I'm Bharat. I'm from the Takshila Institution, Bangalore. So I'm not talking about it from the perspective of legal perspective, which I can't really comment about. But what I think is also important is that these agents or these companies building these agents also have incentives to reduce these errors, right? So they're competing for a market and they have incentives in place already to improve their performance. And we're also talking about edge cases. These are not serious limitations in the capabilities. And they have, I mean, because it's a nascent technology, it will get corrected over a period of time. So a different way to approach it is also to see that there's enough competition in the marketplace. So if Alexa is not doing a good enough job, maybe there's someone else, maybe there's a different agent that can do better at solving these kind of things.
That really solves the current problem. Here and here. Sure.
So I'm going to take the easy way out and then try and build a principle for the hard cases. So there's an app called Liquid. It's a registered investment advisor. So it's in a sector which is highly regulated. They have an agentic AI. It's called Limo. So if you want a stock report before you're buying something or to sort of see whether you want to sell something or not, Limo gives you a full report. It doesn't extend beyond it. It gives you a verdict and it gives you whatever the reliant facts on that are. I think, so in that it becomes very clear if there is any misrepresentation, any issues.
I'm going to ask you to speed up because we're running out of time.
Sure.
That's not agentic work. You're doing the action, he's doing a recommendations, not an agent.
Okay.
Here, sorry.
This is specifically pertaining to the Alexa case. So whenever we place an order, there are so many specifications that we look for. We are looking for the brand, and even within the dollhouse, we will look for certain specifications. My idea is if Alexa placed that particular order without, just if the news anchor just said that Alexa place an order for a dollhouse without going into specific, and made that those due diligence requirements did it itself, as in chose the brand itself, chose the specification, the product type itself, then in that case, the liability, I think in this particular case, will be a lot higher.
On the broadcaster?
On the, on the product. The agentic liability will be a lot higher because the brand name of the product was not mentioned, the price range was not.
I think I mean, we're talking about this from a principle level now, not a specific use case as such. Anyone else?
So, I mean.
And we're going to move back to questions. Sure. Kamya has been reminding me that we've deviated from the topic, but go on.
Very quickly, someone had mentioned about law of agency, and that gives a very good answer also. In Alexa and other cases also. In Alexa, there was an implied authority given to Alexa to buy goods. That's a different thing. It came from TV, but there was an implied authority to buy goods. There was an implied authority to not recognize voices. There was knowledge, and it's not intention, there was knowledge with the user that these things can happen. Obviously, whether all these things can happen together, they might not have the foresight. But saying, obviously, leaving aside that, UX design wise, product management, you should have that, or law should say that you should have these safeguards. If that's there, then obviously the liability is with Alexa. If not, then in cases the user had this knowledge, we can say, we are trying to blame the user, but they had that knowledge, and there was an implied authority with the user that Alexa will go and do this for you, correct? Now, if obviously there was law which says, there has to be these safeguards, then obviously you should need to have those safeguards, and after those safeguards, still there will be edge cases where you will have given them implied authority, and you need to bear that burden.
You're actually losing me now.
Okay, so basically the idea is this: the user knew that Alexa can place a order. User knew it cannot recognize voice, correct? There was an implied authority given to Alexa that you can do this. Now, there might be edge cases, but those edge cases are covered under this implied authority given by the user to Alexa, correct? Now, yes, we can ask that the government or the regulator can bring in, you should have more safeguards, but that's law, correct? That can happen later on, etc. But in the case where there is no legal obligation to have these safeguards, the user has given that implied authority, and the user is liable in the case of Alexa at least.
Okay. We're going to move to regulatory questions now. Yeah, Vibhu, last comment, sorry.
So,
okay.
shall I go?
Yeah, go ahead.
Nikhil, your
very,
ask,
very quick, like
your
30
ask is
seconds.
not very clear. So my question is to you, right? What is your ask? When you're talking about the 2017 Alexa case, at that time, Alexa did not have voice profiles, right? And I think based on that and a few other things, they put in voice profiles for people. They didn't have that. So they kind of did a self-regulation, Amazon did a self-regulation and got this.
No,
How
look,
does it
I'm looking
apply
at
now?
it. I'm looking at it from principles perspective because we are seeing agents being created, both autonomous and semi-autonomous. This is an old example of a autonomous sort of decision that has gone wrong. So I'm trying to use this as an example. I'm not talking about this specific case.
So looking at that example, it became a kind of something that they built on top of it, like all the product managers are talking about, edge case and all. So wouldn't you say that the AI right now is in that nascent stage and people will and companies will, make
if they don't have those
use cases on
protections in place, if let's say like if you look at agentic workflow that are getting created, most of them don't have those protections in place right now because they don't know what the use cases are right now. Some of you just try some of these things, they will do actions based on what you want as an outcome.
So we don't know the use cases, but we're trying to come up with some solution to that. That won't work, right?
No, there are use cases out there, all sorts of use cases out there.
Not with the AI agentic. We are taking an analogy which is from 6-7 years back. And
I think
nothing
that,
started
I'm
with.
sorry, but that's immaterial. Whether it's 6-7 years ago or not, but these workflows still exist. They are still getting created. And they might have addressed that problem, but there are entities right now that haven't even identified what the problems could be. And there are workflows where these issues can emerge. I'm saying, what do you do to protect and how do you apportion liability in that situation?
Now I get it.
Right? Because, for example, you do have, if you use Crew AI for basically customer support, where does that liability for what the decisions that Crew AI makes, where does that liability lie in a customer care situation? So there are multiple tools out there. We've seen a bunch of them. Vashal, you have any thoughts on this? Sorry, go ahead in the meantime.
So I am Krishank from Cuts International. So I'll just say this from that for consumer knows that this is the setting. So how do we establish that in India where there is a considerable digital divide in rural areas and urban areas? So
we're not really going there. I mean, we're looking at it from a principle standpoint. I'm sorry, we're not going to go there. Yeah.
See, I think the answer is the way that I look at a semi-autonomous or autonomous system is that these are fairly easy design choices that lie with the sort of manufacturer / supplier / engineer / product manager, right? So in this case, yes, you can blame the model, but then largely if you talk about an agentic workflow, which is basically based on these frameworks of Crew AI, the liability lies on the designer of these systems.
It doesn't lie on the deployer?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean by a designer, essentially.
Okay.
When I talk about designer, it's not like a specified job profile. It's essentially the team who's providing the system.
Okay, Kamya is going to take over and get us back to what we were supposed to discuss. Okay, significant disagreement. Fight. Okay, go on.
I mean,
very quickly, please. Fight quickly.
Okay, a two-line fight then. I think the responsibility rests with Amazon in the Alexa case because Amazon is also the one that profited off the mistake that Alexa made. Also, you can't be saying that everybody had knowledge. If you put a 900-page terms and conditions, you can't just assume that everybody has read everything and understood everything. Okay, just stick to line.
I'm agreeing with all. But yeah, I think.
I don't know, I'm sorry, but I'm probably the only sociologist in this room because it's full of lawyers and I've been just like listening to everybody and we want to talk about the AI ecosystem. We are probably talking for I don't know how many hours taking AI as a given. Like we don't know what is AI, who developed it, where it comes from, whether it's, I don't know, I'm getting the feeling that we are taking AI as inevitable. Ito hona hi hai, so let's now regulate and liability discussion and I don't know. But I don't know what is the AI ecosystem.
Okay,
I mean,
we're assuming exactly what you're saying, that this is going to increase in usage.
So, but then still, let's problematize. What is AI? Who's building it? Who are the people? If there is liability discussion, then we should also talk about why these discussions are coming and what were the design choices or whatever choices that were taken when the AI was built in. which is the context. We are working in India or Brazil or US. I don't know. I mean, we are not talking about any of it, but like, was Alexa responsible? Like, Alexa is a human being.
Okay. Or I think the over focus on the liability question places the companies at the center of the conversation. That's a bit uncomfortable as civil society.
But I'm saying that I'm also putting the consumer in the part of as a part of the conversation.
But consumer has a relationship with business only.
Correct.
Right?
Shifting
Not
from
as
the
we're
liability
not
question.
looking at, for example, discrimination issues and bias issues right now. In this discussion, we're primarily focusing on liability.
Maybe some conversation can be dedicated to that.
Okay. Varun. And
Just to summarize, I think the principle that you're looking, the principle that you were looking for, I think that principle is sort of already come out in the conversation. So if I had to just summarize it, it's the more and more capabilities that you as a designer, and that could be developer or deployer, provide to an agentic system, and the more and more that you believe that those capabilities can come with emergent and unexpected behavior, the more and more liability you should take on, because you have the most knowledge and control. So that's simply the principle that you should always go back to, and I think that's where the ecosystem point.
But for example, as a designer of that system,
yeah,
my job is also to give the developer, is to give the deployer choice.
Yeah.
So that they can choose what they want and they don't want, and then deploy it for the end consumer.
So from at least all of the examples that we've talking about, we're talking about harm to an end user, and then how do you assign responsibility between the supply chain? There will be always a contract that determines that. So if you want to figure out who to fine or who to penalize, you will find whoever is the most proximate to the consumer first, usually. Okay. And then they will figure it out at the back end about how they're going to distribute those penalties. I'm just like, so for example,
it will be contractually determined,
yeah,
is what you're saying.
Like all these legal systems have like dealt with these problems in other domains, right? So even in aircrafts and stuff, like Boeing runs like supply chains which involve like 500,000 like different suppliers sourcing from everywhere.
Correct.
They have contracts for that.
And
you find Boeing.
And Boeing is not at fault.
Shifting from the...
Boeing is 100% at fault.
I'm kidding.
Yeah. Like,
okay.
Yeah. Let's shift back to the regulatory part of this. We've talked a lot about liability.
So, question, like, should AI be a part of DIA or should there be a separate regulation?
Digital India Act.
DIA is supposed to be the Digital India Act, where there was supposed to be a particular clause on emerging technologies, including AI. So that was one. The other thing is that also we'll talk about potentially a separate AI regulation. So where should this separate regulation for AI?
Just an orthogonal point, the central government in India loves adding bureaucrats and regulators. So we need regulation, but we need technical people who, along with all the policy and sociologists, to kind of butt their heads together and come up with a regulation, because lawyers alone don't understand this enough. I don't mean it in a disrespectful way, but you need... So I feel there should be sector-specific regulation. If you are regulating healthcare, you need to have doctors in the room. If you are regulating AI for law, you need lawyers in the room. If you are regulating AI for XYZ sector, you need professionals who are experts in XYZ to be in the room. And as civil society, we should push back on over-regulation, because the government left to its own devices will always over-regulate.
Okay, point there.
Yeah, hi. So just want to pick up on the last point there. I think...
Also, please identify yourself.
So my name is Vibhav Mittal. I'm with Anand and Anand, and I'm an IPR lawyer. I also do AI. Now, just to pick up on the last point, I think for an AI regulatory framework, I lean a little bit more towards separate regulation, and there's a point for that. I think for AI regulation...
So in terms of separate, you mean an omnibus AI regulation, or do you mean sectoral regulation?
No, I mean omnibus. Just, there's a thought. You can fit that in whichever category eventually. But where I'm leaning in terms of that sense is that for an AI regulation perspective, regulation of healthcare, regulation, actually both can be simultaneous. Regulation of healthcare, regulation of different sectors can be are applications of use cases or where AI is being applied. Before that, we need to take a step back and have a macro picture in terms of how do we want the general principles to stand. Therefore, I'm talking about a bigger framework. Otherwise, in the current scenario, a practical step, most harmful use cases of AI can go into different sectors, sectoral regulations, or if you're trying to look into the TIA. So it's sort of a complementary approach. So I'm looking at it.
So I think as far as Digital India Act is concerned, it's just a concept at this point of time. I mean, except that presentation, we don't know what's about that. Okay. Second thing is in terms of the regulation framework, I think first of all, we should have a proper national AI policy or strategy. Then only we should talk about regulation after that. And because currently we don't have, frankly, any national level strategy of that sort. And once we have that, then only we should talk about regulation. And again, there, it would be much better to have it as part of the existing legislation, applying that itself, rather than creating a new legislation for AI exclusively, because tomorrow there could be another technology, and again, people will talk about a new legislation. And it takes a pretty long time. For example, from 1885 to 2023, Telegraph Act.
Okay. In terms of...
Identify, please.
Oh, hi. Anuj Nakade from Nagrik Project. And in terms of regulating AI, I believe it's important to understand how it will be used is the first step, in the sense that what does...
So very specific, separate bill, why included in other legislations, why... How do we
separate bill for the public-facing AIs in the terms of the AI that has been deployed on the internet for access of the public. In terms of services provided by AIs custom built for service provision, for example, legal research, one of them, medical research, one of them. Those will be regulated separately by separate bills that govern those areas of specific research, because there's a lot of sector-specific knowledge that might go into it.
Okay.
And separate liability for both of them as well.
Yeah, him and then there.
Yeah. So Tapan this side from Tide Financial Services. So the idea behind what I think from my personal experience is it's always better to have sectorial approach while defining the laws. But what I've seen in my personal experience as an in-house counsel or as
so there are two types of, like, one is sectoral, but the other is also general purpose that we use, like
yes,
Gemini, Meta AI, ChatGPT.
I'm generally saying that public, you can have a divide between, sectoral approach and what is available to the public. But what I've seen in my personal experience, what is more effective, right, is more sectoral approach. Because as an in-house counsel, and I have my own issues with, sectoral approaches as well. Because at the end of the day, for me and for my team,
don't get me started on your sectoral regulator.
Yeah. So it becomes more of a checklist, right? It's not effective. Compliance, the whole compliance program for an in-house counsel becomes more of a checklist. Okay, the government has issued checklist, now I have to go with my departments and do the checklist. But it is not effective to protect the rights of data subjects, for example, in GDPR. It is just merely becomes like, okay, once the Data Protection Authority comes to me, knocks on my door, I will be able to present them with my documents. But whether they are effective or not, I really don't have an answer.
Okay.
Okay, so I would just like to add what he was saying, like, I'm Manikant Roy from IIT Delhi from academic perspective. So basically we can have a two framework. Like one is like the principle based that we are discussing so far, right? Since the start of the session, that we should have AI principles based regulation. And second, then we can have a rule based that is very specific, that we are saying sectoral based, because each sector will require different. For example, this healthcare may be very different than education.
So, okay, right. So anyone has any difference of opinion or new points to add? Yeah, sorry, we're waiting for you. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, hi, Priya from US India Strategic Partnership Foundation. Actually not differing, but why do we need regulation at all at this stage? We're not ready. It will take the government ages to get caught up. I suggest a Japan approach. Just want to throw that in there.
Okay, any takers for no regulation? No regulation. No regulation here. All no regulation. Minimal. Who wants regulation? Okay, counter.
Just different. I think, and I'm going to translate this a bit into reality. You will have a DPDP law, and then different states will come out with different laws and contradict the DPDP law, and there'll be a maximum confusion as to which company should subscribe to which law, because the companies are operating pan-India.
No, but we're talking about no law right now.
No, so I'm not no law. But I'm making another point. I'm saying that as much as I don't think that's the best way, there should be a principles-based approach from the central government on a law, right, which builds standards for a model law for other states and other governments and other sectors, because you are bound to have sectoral laws, right? If AI is a given,
in that sense, DIA or
not DIA
or AI law,
I'm saying
AI
that,
Act.
I'm saying that let's have an omnibus AI Act,
Omnibus AI Act,
which establishes baseline principles.
AI authority.
Maybe, who knows? We don't even have any regulators, so maybe
Okay.
an AI authority should do it. And then you're anyway going to have sectoral sort of specific
Or AI
laws.
board, which does no regulation but only
Independence
you know
is
what
the
you
critical
know where I'm
question.
going. Huh? Mics का बहुत problem हो रहा है. boss.
One thing to keep in mind is that regardless of whether or not you set up new AI authority, new AI law, sectoral regulators will continue to exist and continue to regulate their spaces. I think the specific problem that we need to solve, which is being called as a DIA problem or a sector agnostic problem, is the fact that all our regulation of services offered over the internet take place through the IT rules. The IT rules are essentially functioning today as India's version of the Digital Services Act. If you had to if you have to pull a comparison, that's the problem we need to solve. That's the only problem you really need to solve, because then through a framework that like functions like a standalone Digital Services Act, where safe harbor is preserved to the extent as like it currently is, then you can solve a lot of problems, because you can shift the IT rules into a statutory framework, and then through regulating platforms, you can
You
regulate
mean
AI
pass a
services.
Digital India Act that makes the IT rules legal?
No. Pass a Digital India Act that makes a legal version of the IT rules more like
Because the IT
sound.
rules are currently illegal.
Correct.
So-
I'm saying that like you have to solve, like if the problem you want to solve, you want a problem to solve that will be done through DIA. That problem is to fix the IT rules and the overall problems that exist with it.
So you're saying principles in the DIA?
I'm saying Digital Services Act that essentially allows us to shift away from the problems that we currently have with the IT rules, and that indirectly ends up also regulating AI services, because they are all ultimately digital services or platforms or intermediaries.
Okay. You were waiting. Sorry. Anyone here?
Yeah, a very
We'll
short
come to this
answer,
second.
yes, regulation, because it'll take a really long time to come. DPDP took like 6 years. If you start now on AI Act,
No, but
you'll be well beyond.
so DIA or AI Act?
AI Act, I think an omnibus regulation for something like this would be better,
Okay.
and
Guys,
you'll rush
I-
through if you do DIA.
I'm just going to say that no regulation is probably not going to happen, because we are one disaster away from a regulation. Just remember that. And then what happens there is very, very difficult and problematic to deal with. So it's better to say regulate but light touch, or regulate and protect certain use cases, and we'll get into some of that if we have time. So you've been waiting for a long time, and I'm sorry, last time I forgot to come to you. He's been waiting for a very long time.
I'm Gurik Pal Singh Jaiya, representing SKS Law Associates, an IPR law firm. I'm also a medical doctor. I'm big into privacy, AI, security. On the data prevention bill
So,
itself-
mic up, we can't hear you.
Now, I think I'll just make one limited point here. We should also look at the ISO IEC 42001 enacted in December 2023. That is the framework for users to use to be able to deal with the challenges that will ultimately also require a solution at the regulatory level, at the national and the international level. Given the nature of these services, given the linkages to the digital system as a whole, the more splintering you have of legislations, greater the challenge for the companies within a country and across the countries.
So what's the solution?
So primarily the focus comes back to self-regulation, and this framework that I'm talking of ISO IEC is all about self-regulation.
Self-regulation, anyone? Takers for self-regulation? Up there. Sorry, you want to talk about
I was
self-regulation of AI?
I was actually going to just add to this. I think ultimately we will probably have a legislation on AI at some point. But I do think that maybe a starting point could be a voluntary code of sorts. I also think it's two ways. One is when we are thinking of regulating AI, sometimes we are only thinking about private sector. I, in fact, worry more about how public sector and governance is also using AI to deliver, services to citizens. So there is some framework which is required.
I think Disha had made that point earlier.
So I think that's one, and then it could be a good starting point.
Self-regulation, no regulation, AI Act, DIA. Dhruv, what's your
No
take?
regulation, I think, should not be promoted. Because either the courts will enter or government will come with a knee-jerk advisory again, which after a week they'll take back.
The courts will tell the government to come out with a law.
And then the government again, a knee-jerk. So I think no regulation is.
Sorry, Vashul, no, there will be a law, I think.
Yeah, but I think what we should, EU approach is some way, because see, it doesn't apportion liability. So I think sectoral laws for liability, harm, and technical assistance. That's the way. And omnibus just for some semblance. I think Shashank was saying some principle level things for the technical papers. What kind of data, etc. Some bare minimum at a AI Act level, and then sectoral regulations separately for harm, apportionment, liability, and technicality.
In which areas would self-regulation be effective? Where should self-regulation be okay? So if we had to say, so let's divide this into three parts and saying there's only one solution, right? Where should there be regulation? Where should there be self-regulation? Where should there be no regulation?
Okay, so if you take what EU does, correct? On certain very minimum risk, they say have transparency laws, correct? We can also bracket it according to risk, correct? Where there is very minimal risk, etc. And I know it's complicated, it's not that easy. We should let self-regulation be, and that should be the answer. But again, when we are talking about, let's say, medical health, correct? When a doctor is using certain things,
correct.
then the sectoral laws need to definitely come in, and that's going to. So we can have a graded approach to it, correct? But an omnibus principle-based law will be needed just to have that common vocabulary that the policy maker will take in different sectors, etc.
Okay. He's waiting.
So if I may to say self-regulation won't work given the history.
No, now we're going one level deeper. Okay. Where should there be self-regulation? Where should there be no regulation? And where should there be like an omnibus regulation? So let's divide it. So another question that I have, and maybe we can take that up immediately. Should there be regulation for risks, or should there be regulation for harms? That's the other thing.
So context and scenario, one needs to consider that harms greater than risks, because if we can divide, to summarize, we should see that what affects as a society as a whole and what affects individually. If we classify on the basis of that, then we can determine the consideration or regulations a bit better than other contexts.
Okay, thoughts? You have very bad luck with mics, man.
I take this one. Yeah, no, it's working. Yeah, I'm saying that no regulation, primarily on the innovation part. Okay.
Explain innovation.
Innovations, in a sense, where you are using this data for statistical purposes and research purposes. We are not publicly making it available to the public at large. And self-regulation is on technical specifications, like your ISO standards, sir mentioned.
So you had an example?
So research on foundation models in academia. So we should not follow the US example where it says beyond a certain number of parameters or beyond using so much compute, it has to be regulated by an authority. That is absolutely flawed. It will hurt innovation.
Correct.
And that's why the whole US industry is up in arms against it. So that should not be regulated, but health, legal, education should all be regulated.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned innovation in the no regulation bucket. In the self-regulation bucket, we can have technical specifications for the...
Good point. What about military use cases of AI?
Again, see, you have...
Or policing use cases of AI?
It is not deployed on publicly, right? If the
policing use cases are deployed only
innovation,
on public.
No, I'm saying innovation. That's why I'm putting innovation in the no regulation and
There's innovation in policing also.
But I'm saying no, innovation which is not put in public at large, right? Which is not deployed on public at large.
Okay.
So when you're putting in public at large, then it becomes in a regulation. Then it falls into the regulation bucket. We have three buckets, right? Regulation, self-regulation, and no regulation. Till the time you're doing innovation and you're not deploying it on public at large, it should be in no regulation. When you're deploying your product in public at large, within that bracket, you should have technical specifications which should come under the self-regulation, your ISO standards for that matters. Your privacy standards, ISO 27001, 27701, 22001.
I don't know that.
And regulation and the regulation should come into the picture when you are giving rights to the public at large in order to exercise their rights. So if the company does not respect my rights, then I should have a body where I can go and complain against the company.
So you're saying a harms-based approach rather than a risk-based approach?
To sum it up to a certain extent, yes.
Okay. Varun, and I'll come here. Okay, you have the mic. Yes, please.
I don't agree with firstly, I'm Ayushi from IIT Bombay. I don't agree with giving free pass to academia. When you look at EU and their research-based thing, they have an exception that things do not apply when you come to research institutions. But for example, if you see, like I've worked with medical data before, and if you look at the regulations there is a loophole. You can use federated learning. You are not violating the GDPR, but you can train your models on patient data that has been collected for research. So companies can train models if you're not effectively storing data. But if you don't regulate anything in the academia sector, then there are research collaborations that happen between India and abroad. So our data effectively gets shared as research data there. But how are you going to prevent companies in EU making profit on our data shared, like in the research space?
Okay. Sorry, someone wanted to respond. I know. Go ahead.
Very quickly, I think that we are looking at the solution and then trying to match it to problems. The choice of regulatory tool and approach depends upon the problem you're trying to solve, right? So maybe it depends on starting there. Across all of these examples, like I think like a very good starting point can be about thinking how to solve for information asymmetry between the service providers and consumers, right? So you want them to be more transparent, you want them to have disclosures, you want them to do like make data cards available and things like that. If that is the focus, then the only case for a sector agnostic like framework is one which allows you to have those new legal definitions required to define developers and deployers, etc., and then assign these kind of obligations to them. And what those obligations are depend upon the problems you're trying to solve. In India, given that like we don't actually know a lot about all the various ways in which AI is being developed, what are the various harms. Like obviously we do have like well-researched bodies of work in narrow fields like public services, policing, etc. But we have not done all the hard work that perhaps has been done to inform the EU AI Act in the same level of work, right? So maybe a good place for us to start right now is think of a DIA which allows you to bring in those definitions that everybody else can then also cite and rely on, and start with transparency obligations that allow you to ensure that services are only offered if they come with the necessary disclosures required for consumers, and those disclosures are meaningful and updated. Start there, then we move on to the next step.
So again, going back to the older question.
A small like horizontal framework that focuses on transparency would be a good starting point, because it would give you definitions that sectoral regulators can rely on and maybe give them additional tools.
And then basically empower the sectoral regulators to protect consumers.
Yeah, so effectively the model that you would like in India is a DRCF kind of situation.
What is DRCF?
The UK Digital Regulatory Cooperation Forum, where you create an overarching framework that forces regulators to cooperate like using a common body of evidence and common regulatory tools and things like that. So like if in the health sector you want to ensure that like doctors or like people providing AI systems to doctors are transparent and provide all the necessary disclosures required for doctors to be informed, then a sectoral framework, like a cross-sectoral framework, would allow the sectoral regulator to introduce.
But you also have problems of lack of capacity among sectoral regulators, especially to understand these things, right? Remember the terrible health regulation that we got for streaming services in August last year.
But lack of capacity is not a regulatory design problem as much as it is about figuring out how to build capacity, which doesn't require regulation. You can just you can hire people.
Got it.
Yeah. So my name is Hadi Khan. I am a developer, and I want to give 3 distinct use cases for regulation, no regulation, and self-regulation.
Okay.
So mainly for regulation, the most obvious one is deepfakes. Anything that involves pictures, videos of people, politicians, celebrities, violence, that should be regulated off the back. Secondly is self-regulation. This is your trivial use cases that OpenAI and other Gen AI companies already do. That is how to make a bomb, how to harvest a kidney, how to hide a dead body, so on and so forth. And this is,
so that is under self-regulation.
Yes, I see this.
That's a trivial use case.
I see this as a PR thing.
Huh?
I see this as a PR thing, as a public relations sort of marketing, brand image thing.
How is how to hide a dead body a PR thing?
Such that people don't think of my company in a negative way.
I don't get that.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Okay.
But that already is happening without any external regulatory body, just for public opinion and just to get public opinion to your favor. Companies already do that. That's one use case. And the third one is no regulation. That is for fun use cases like meme generation. And also, I will support academia and research purposes.
What if a meme is defamatory to someone?
Yeah, then there is an overlap between regulation for deepfakes. But memes nowadays anybody can make, and they are offensive, they are defamatory, and you cannot do anything about that really. So it just follows that same principle as any human generating a meme versus an AI generating a meme. I put them in the same category.
Okay.
And thirdly, I want to touch on the medical data point.
Yeah.
I think that's very relevant where regulation is needed. We have something called as synthetic data generation, where we use large language models to take a sample size of, let's say, 500 or 100 entry points and then scale it up to 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 based on that. So it's very close to lifelike data, very close to real data, but it's just arbitrary in nature.
Correct.
Yeah, it's not attributing to any real person, real entity.
I understand.
But yeah, that's synthetic data, and that's for medical and or different private data.
So synthetic data should not be regulated?
No. If a private data has to be regulated.
But if it's synthetic data, it's not pertaining to any person, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If data has to be regulated, then synthetic data is an alternative, is a way around.
Okay, so synthetic data should not be regulated, correct?
Yes.
Okay, he has the mic, so go ahead, and then we'll come to him. And so we just.
Yeah, so I am Akash. I work at Digital India Foundation. I also work with a lot of startups. So I have slight disagreement on the regulation of the R&D part. I think we are regulating for Indian ecosystem. We are nowhere near in foundational models. So nowhere near compute level research. So there has to be no regulation on, let's say, basic foundational LLMs.
No, we're not just talking about Indian ecosystem. We're talking, and Indian ecosystem also includes companies that are deploying in India. It's not just Indian companies that we're talking about. So we're not, and I don't think there's a case for differential regulation between companies deploying in India and Indian companies deploying in India.
No, my point is
other foreign companies.
Specifically on foundational models, if an Indian company or it's an Indian institution is trying to do something over it, you should not put over-regulation or some sort of regulatory apparatus because they are nowhere near. They are absolutely.
I don't know. So, for example, Swecha AI has done a Telugu LLM, which gives 95% accuracy. It's a 300 MB model.
I was talking to Professor Mosam at IIT Delhi, and he was saying that at the foundational layer level,
Swecha has already built this out.
But at the foundational layer level, Indian researchers.
We have Krutim.
Krutim is okay. I don't want to get into technical details, but it's not nowhere near the levels which OpenAI or other.
This is the one that Pranab Mystery's built. I've forgotten the name now.
2AI.
2AI. No. This is Reliance's AI that he's built. I think.
Companies too.
Okay, they're also live right now. It's a foundational model.
If you go deeply into technicalities, I don't think so. We are at nowhere near at the levels.
We may not be as good as the others, but it doesn't mean that we are not getting them.
But you can have a regulatory cost over those people where the market is not saturated. They don't have the ecosystem. They don't have the academic levels.
So you're saying no regulation
for those specific. Let's say foundational pieces, if you're trying, you should not put regulatory pressure or.
So you're saying some foundational models should be regulated and some should not?
Any Indian institution who's trying to do something and solving that problem which India doesn't have capacity, you should not have any regulatory pressure on them.
Okay. Anyone has a response to that? Okay. Yeah. Response is no regulation to anything that's Indian.
I think.
We'll get to that one second.
First of all, I think when we are talking about AI regulation, we are talking about all levels of AI, right? Like foundation, deployer, the one who's deploying, etc. And I think the point that Varun was making, I think there needs to be some transparency norms which apply to everyone. And I understand where you are coming from because we don't want to put any brakes to Indian innovation. Therefore, when I was saying that maybe the first step could be self-regulation, that's also one way of working with the government and coming to a common understanding of what needs to be regulated. And some transparency can actually also inform policymakers that this is what is possible, this is what is not possible, because I think that also is, there's a lot of information asymmetry. So first we need to remove that information asymmetry in the ecosystem. So I do think that it can't be no regulation. Maybe the first step could be self-regulation, which over a few years then formalizes into legislation. And I also, sorry, just one thing, I don't think we should start from DIA. First of all, we don't know whether that's still on agenda or not for sure in MITI. And second, it's an omnibus legislation. It will take years to pass. Then we'll have nothing in the meantime. I don't think we should have a void complete at this point.
I think Varun was saying that sectoral regulators will get active in any case.
Yeah, they will. They will. They already are.
So, in my opinion, compute should be regulated.
Identify yourself, please.
I'm Mayank. I am an instruction designer. I work with AI and I automate a lot of things. So, in my opinion, compute should be regulated, and access to users, the cost of access should be regulated, in the sense that I've seen a lot of Hindi or Indic languages.
So what do you mean compute should be regulated?
Compute as in GPU, how many companies are using what kind of compute power, and that should be something which should
be regulated.
At least it should be told to the people that, how much compute each company has, or what are their capabilities, or even a government entity on an international level. I think that can make things.
So there are two broad sides, right?
Like I just have one more point, if I could just share that. So second thing I was saying that cost of access should be regulated. That right now, Indic languages tokens in foundational models are way too costly, and they're not very efficient versus the English language tokens. So that should be self-regulated.
But you have a choice to not use, no?
But it should be self-regulated by companies to give it a uniform level, right?
So that's up to a company and the compute that it takes. They have their own costing mechanisms. I don't think they're pricing them higher by choice necessarily.
But that could lead to an innovation also in that space. That
it leads to the ability for someone else to build something. I don't think you want to get into pricing of concerns here. So you were also waiting, yeah. Sorry.
I mean, I think the point is right. I mean, regarding block, like essentially having a check on the hardware, right? That is an argument that was being used earlier, but not so much these days, because I mean, practically all of the internet information via ChatGPT is free for everyone to use, right? So there's no sort of use like blockage on compute or hardware that you can put. Although I'd like to take a separate view on this, right? I'm not sure how many people have heard about this term effective accelerationism.
Altruism, effective altruism.
No, not the altruism, the acceleration. So it's basically E-AG. So you would see a lot of Twitter profiles with E/AG. It's a philosophy in tech, it's a new age philosophy, which talks about that, actually I can just read it, So it says that the only way to truly understand and mitigate the risks of advanced AI is to rapidly develop the technology. Right? What that essentially means is, rather than talking about no regulation, and I'm sorry I changed my stance from no regulation to light touch regulation, thanks to Nikhil and this group, there definitely needs to be some light touch regulation which caters to more long-term goals, right? I mean, we as a humanity would want to cater to more existential risks and would figure out ways to prevent that, and not harper on these innovations that are very new age. All of this AI is very much evolutionary. This is very, very iterative. As in when we speak, this changes each and every day. So rather than talking about a very sort of a structured and a nuanced, verticalized way to look at regulation, I think the answer is a more light touch regulation, which focuses on more existential risks and let the sort of innovation happen.
Vasul, I keep going back to the point of that advisory that came out, right? There was an issue. There was a harsh reaction to it.
That was just purely like information.
No, but you are, like I keep saying, you're one disaster away from bad regulation.
Yeah, but then I think that primarily was due to bad information dissemination of what AI generally means. And Nikhil, from that February to this July, I think we've covered a decent enough journey. Where we have certain bodies and certain groups which talk about AI, right?
Yeah.
So having to define an ill-defined policy just based on that knee-jerk reaction that happened in Feb, I think that's also not the right way to look at it.
Okay.
Okay, so someone mentioned synthetic data. If we are still talking about that, then I'll make a point. So how do you generate synthetic data? That is itself a model output, right? Like you are using regression.
Could we stick to regulation, synthetic data? You can have that conversation. Just pass the mic there quickly, please.
With regard to the regulation, whether it should be no or light touch or co-regulation, I'm looking from the perspective of elections. The kind of data...
So you'll have to speed up because we're running out of time on this.
So electoral integrity is something really important, and I believe still we are following the self-regulation perspective. I believe light touch will not work. Maybe the co-regulation where citizens, the companies and the state. If we allow the self-regulation, government holds the more power to use the AI data for themselves. No, and citizens won't have it. I believe that co-regulation...
I don't know whether that's related to what we're discussing. Sorry. Someone here? Huh. I thought there was a point. Sorry, yes. Then we'll go there and then back. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to add another goal for regulation to consider. Okay. I just want to add another goal that we should consider, which is that regulation before the technology is invented and or is in the process of developing is important to make sure that everyone catches up with the technology. Corporates that have access to this technology have greater leverage
Just for context, IT Act came in 2000.
Mm-hmm.
India had an internet penetration of about 15 million people at that point in time. There are more AI users today in this country. And so, I don't know. I don't think not enough people using is an argument here.
I mean, this is in response to the fact that light regulation and acceleration before is a solution.
I'm assuming 400 people have Meta AI right now because WhatsApp has it. WhatsApp has about 550 million internet users in India.
Fair enough.
Numbers, I don't know. But here, sorry, yes, sir.
Arushi backed out, but I will continue her point. Potential for bias, data privacy concerns, transparency and explainability.
So you'll have to hold the mic close, please. We can't hear you.
I said synthetic data needs to be regulated on 4 counts. Potential for bias, data privacy concerns, transparency and explainability, and finally on misuse and malicious applications.
We're discussing AI and not synthetic data. Sorry. Yes.
So I'll go back to what we were discussing, no regulation, self-regulation, low regulation and high regulation. So one thing that we missed out on during all of this discussion was there are a lot of internal AI tools. In what area do they come in? Let's say if any company, let's say Tinder create some sort of internal AI score. For example, we saw in the EU Act, they have...
Correct. So we're talking more about generative, but that would be in a recommendation engine. Yeah.
Sure.
But go on.
Yeah, generative inside a corporation or let's say the public does not know that it is AI generated.
Okay.
So something of like some sort of internal tool. So where would we be on the AI regulation in that? Because we cannot have that self-regulated because they would just simply not disclose.
I think someone had made that point. You'd made that point about if it's to communication to the public, then a different sort of a lens to look at it. If it is only internal, then there's a different lens to look at it.
So to give you one more example, even TaxBuddy has some internal tool which their CAs use in order to file ITR, and then there's a human in the loop. So the CA communicates it to me over WhatsApp or on an email. Why using that tool? So they compute my taxation using some API integrations internally, and then that person validates it, and then it forwards me to my customer.
What is preventing them from removing the human?
What is preventing them? So I can take an example from EU GDPR. In Article 22, there's right against automated decision making, which a data subject can opt in, right? So I can choose that.
This you're saying this will not come under the AI regulation, but rather under that act.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just making a point. It's open to discussion, right? That it can come under that also. But how? Because there's a human in the loop, and AI is not interfering with my decision of filing that tax amount. So just to take a tax buddy example, the taxation amount which is calculated, it is calculated by AI. Then there's some cross questioning between AI and the CA of tax buddy. Then the tax buddy CA communicates the same to me, that according to our system, this is coming, and then after my verification, this is the final amount which you have to pay.
So
then it is
the
a final
liability and the regulatory framework for a human in the loop is already
Correct, yes.
figured out. So we're not going there. Sorry.
Hi, Nikhil.
Yeah.
Hello.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I also want
Please
come
identify yourself as well.
Yeah, I am Darshika from Chase. So I would like to come back to the question of AI regulation. I would like to I'm in favor of the light touch regulation, where because India right now needs more people to use AI.
So is there a new point or this point's been made?
Just a response to the earlier point that we more need economics of scale to reach, and that's why we need more people to use AI, and that's why new developers as well.
Sorry, why do we need more people to use AI? I am a little unclear.
Okay, so let's not go there. Just you had something to respond to.
Yeah, I did actually. So in a similar thing, like if you look at like internal use of AI tools, there was a pretty famous case that happened a couple of years ago in Indonesia where there was a job, like think of it like Urban Company and things like that, where they had an internal system where they used to assign scores to people. And then they said, oh, we don't use a tool, and they didn't disclose the scores. And essentially they had their internal system where scores kept falling so people wouldn't get the jobs that they wanted. In a case like that, wouldn't you ideally want the company to be transparent when people are losing like jobs and they're being affected and there's bias playing in? That's one of the problems with this. If you don't have regulation, you just have self-regulation. Ideally, you don't want the company that makes profit to be the ones to disclose information.
So that's a discrimination issue.
It is, but generally this is a larger transparency issue that will lead to a lot of issues.
So I think pretty much everyone agrees upon the fact that there's a need for transparency.
But not self-regulation.
Not self-regulation and transparency.
Not light touch, not self-regulation. Regulation that mandates transparency.
So this is the pro-regulation table. Except him. Okay. So sorry. There's a point over there also, please. But go on, Varun.
Just one small thing. We haven't really talked about it, but I don't know if one of the regulatory objectives is to factor in the environmental cost of building and running and using generative AI systems. It hasn't really come up in the conversation, so I was wondering if that is also within the scope of
Not really something we're discussing right now. But it's important, but not a legislative thing, right?
Not really, but like it does point to the principal problem that I think that like we've not seen enough discussion on, which is that sometimes you want to also not use AI because the costs are greater than what they merit. So that should also consider the environmental cost of increasing use of these extremely extractive and like.
I understand. We're also taking into account that how Moore's law operates is probably going to also kick in, where you'll get better, faster, cheaper, more efficient, less heat generating solutions coming up, and that is no. And I'm saying people will be working towards that. Sorry.
Quick two inputs. One being on the self-regulation bit that people have been speaking about. I completely believe that this is also the reason why we need a risk-based categorization, primarily because a lot of people have been talking about innovation, economies of scale. Yes, we do need more people to innovate and more people to be able to access the technology and work with it. And we do need a categorization to ensure that we do not let let risks pass through these kind of leeways. The other being,
so I know the EU has taken a risk-based approach, but is there anyone here who thinks there should be more of a harms-based approach, as in, as they say, ex ante versus ex post approach?
I think. Hi, Nikhil, Akash here again.
Yeah.
I think I'm a little bit provocative here. Most regulation conversations are led by big tech because they are winners in the system. You will never see a startup or anyone having a regulation conversation. And
Akash, I need a... So
that's why I'm saying.
Can we get to the point, please?
That's the thing. That's why harm-based approach will always, a startup will say, because they don't know, they're developing it, they will always ask for harms-based approach.
Okay.
Always, incumbents will always ask for risk-based approach because they are already winners in the system. They already have developed a very sophisticated product, and they don't want their main pie, their main innovation to be questioned, main innovation to be challenged. So that's why.
So I'm not going to attribute intent to any stakeholder about what they want, but I'm just saying, is there a rationale for risk versus harms.
For
I'm not really getting to the politics of it. That's not that's not the purpose of our discussion.
For an underdeveloped research market, you have to follow a harm-based approach because you can't preempt risks. It has to be harm-based.
Risk or harms, guys?
The problem with a purely harms-based approach is very often when AI systems are used, they are not disclosed that they are used. We don't know when harms occur. We don't know when sort of the AI systems are applied. So that will be completely insufficient to answer the societal harms we're facing with AI use.
By the way, guys, we're going to go about half an hour over time. I hope that's
And
okay
very
with
quickly,
folks.
if I may add, I mean, there is regulatory sandboxing that is being provided. There is a Krutim AI. There is an India AI mission that is building compute facilities to allow access to startups and to enable them to have a kickstart in an industry where they are up against big players. So everybody who is saying that this is the only way to be up against a big player, no, there are opportunities and options available today. And the other thing that I wanted to touch upon is that self-regulation, if at all, is being considered. Personally, as a citizen of this country, I would greatly appreciate if it comes bundled with other things like fundamental impact rights assessment, etc., which allows us to have an opportunity to know that a company is following what they are supposed to follow. We have seen an example in multiple cases before with corporates, one being recently affirmative action in India and reservations where corporates went up and said they will do it themselves and they would encourage people. Where have we reached? Where is that conversation we can all see and we are all familiar with? So can we focus on that too?
We're going to move to the last bit about measures to support. I'm sorry, we can't. We're bang out of time. We have 30 minutes. If it's okay, we'll just do about 15, 20 minutes over time.
Excellent segue to innovation. So there's a bunch of measures everybody's trying to do. Regulatory sandboxes being one of them. There's also, in the EU, they're asking for, they're allowing testing of high-risk models in real-world conditions. Also, they're communicating with startups to provide advice about how the act should be implemented. US is looking at attracting talent to the country, AI talent. They're also developing public-private partnerships, supporting innovation in different ways, providing computation and data resources, clarifying patent issues, clarifying other IP considerations, and also ensuring market competition. UK, again, supporting innovators through training routes, upskilling, investment in research in a bunch of institutes, investment in technical upskilling. There's another AI sandbox here, and the forum we've already talked about. China is also doing a bunch of things to support innovation. In their case, it's more algorithm supporting, chip supporting, and software platform support. India, we all know about the India AI mission. There's a budget outlay for that. There's GPUs that are going to be allocated through a PPP model. And there's plans of building an indigenous AI. Yeah, I'm just not going to take too much time here and jump straight into questions.
So, quick question about, are there measures anyone has ideas about how to, beyond what we've seen with the India AI mission? And Kami, you could go back to that slide, please, in terms of, one is, should we be buying GPUs or building GPUs or buying GPUs with a PP model? Is that buying compute? Anyone has any views on that? Vashul? So just general thoughts on what can we do to encourage AI deployment in the country. I know a lot of pro-regulation folks have left the room the moment we started talking about innovation. Sorry, I couldn't help that one, but thoughts?
But then what is the other way if we don't procure GPUs? What is the alternative? There's no alternative. I mean, the best of the gigafactories that are being built on GPUs is essentially powered by NVIDIA, and that has to be the way because there's no second other player that essentially is looking at innovation. Even efforts around, from Kratrim, etc., could be a dent in a more mid to long term, but from a more short to mid term, if you have to accelerate and really focus on innovation, then procuring GPUs has to be the #1 priority, right? And I mean, NVIDIA has to.
Is there no alternative to this?
Well, I mean, the max of the hardware costs that are being accrued for any AI startup is essentially just pure GPU, not even CPUs or disks or.
So one other debate that I heard, Vasul, was that we are also sending a lot of foreign exchange out of the country. In the sense, we're spending a lot on foreign exchange and we're procuring, or when we're using services that are international. How do we address that cost issue in the country? If I'm using API
from OpenAI, from MediaNama. I'm spending money and that's going out of the country.
Forget about that. Like, even if you want to build a llama in India, like, even then you would need to...
At least with Llama, I don't have to pay anything until I get 300 million users, right?
Not yet.
Not yet.
But I mean, look at it this way, right? If you essentially want to do any AI effort in India, then procuring GPUs is essentially like there's no indigenous, effort that's putting India to an advantage, because the entire life cycle of semiconductor and like GPU manufacturing, India doesn't play any part, From there's TSMC to even the sort of there's the Netherlands company, right? Like, India plays no part in the entire value chain, and that's I think 1 or 2 decades of just pure hardware innovation that India missed on, like back in 90s and 2000s. So yeah, this is like,
okay,
yeah.
If I was to just add, I mean, we do play a significant part in the chip design supply chain, and yes, so we do have the talent, and I agree with you there that we don't seem to have lots of alternatives to building this massive compute capacity. It is a high entry barrier industry, and we do need a government and a public-private model which can successfully cooperate with people to help people and startups. So I completely agree with you there. We do need it. Also, I would believe from a national economic security interest, we do need indigenous compute capabilities, and urgently so. So I wouldn't doubt that.
Yeah, so I'm actually in favor of this model of buying GPUs. This is the industry standard for startups essentially to rent out GPUs in exchange of equity. Because the rental cost for GPUs is so high, it makes more sense to give up equity in exchange for GPU usage. And this model should be followed in India. Perhaps I will point out a significant market gap here. So these GPUs and CPUs, these are actually called application-specific integrated circuits, ASICs. And GPU is just one of them. We have DPUs, TPUs, and now LPUs, if you've heard of Grok. So they've made a language processing unit that's especially for sequential processing. GPUs are for parallel processing. There's a big difference. And LPUs outperform GPUs for large language models any day. But why GPUs are the meta, so to say, in the industry, it's because of the availability, the manufacturing processes. So Grok cannot support that right at this stage, but this is a market gap that India can capitalize on, is to change the focus perhaps from big players like NVIDIA and change the focus from GPUs to other ASICs like LPUs or other chips developed for this.
So one part would be perhaps building a design ecosystem and investing in that, so we solve this problem, let's say 2, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years from now. That would be one. But procuring, you're saying, so GPU procurement is something that we'll have to do. Understood. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. For the long term, it's definitely we have to design.
Could you just pass the mic next to you? Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you. I think on this debate of, okay, we need more GPUs, there's some line of thinking to say we shouldn't fall into that trap, right? We're never going to get anywhere close to where China is, to where the US was with GPUs. And the conversation there then says, okay, let's think more intentionally about our data strategy, and also about what we'll do with these GPUs. Is it going to go just to the IITs? Or do we have a strategy to say, okay, can we figure out a way for access to trickle down really? Because that's where use or innovation, India's great at that, right? You put you give an exam at a university level and everyone will try their best to win and come out at the top. So that's one thing. It's about, okay, you have these GPUs, do we need more? Can we afford more? Maybe not, but how we distribute it is important. And then second, on thinking more intentionally about our data strategy. Japan has done this really well. And then what else can we do?
Sorry, could you elaborate on what our data strategy would be according to you, or should be according to you?
For example, the government, we're not even on hypercloud as yet, right? We're very far away from that. So thinking more open data, which I know is a key pillar of the India AI mission, and that's great. But open data is one key thing. Just getting government capacity.
What do you think of non-personal data?
in this context? What
Yeah,
do you mean?
there was an entire committee set up for non-personal data where they would say that private companies should, their analytics data, the non-personal data that doesn't pertain to an individual, but it's, let's say, aggregated data, should be made available to companies outside, and there should be like data banks that are created. And there was one point there was a proposal for a non-personal data authority that would sanction the transfer of data from, let's say, an Amazon or an Uber traffic data being transferred to someone else who needs to do, let's say, route planning and stuff like that. So there was also that idea that non-personal data should be taken from companies that have private data sets that help them become more efficient.
I haven't thought deeply about that, or I haven't followed what went on there.
Okay.
But I think another thing...
There's enough on Medianama there that you might want to look up.
Yeah, that'll be great. Another thing, just to say, okay, what else can we do, is public-private partnerships, right? In Taiwan, you had NVIDIA partner with their government and to set up data centers. That's a great way to say, okay, other than GPUs, what else can we do? Yeah, that's just the few points I wanted to...
Could you also just please identify yourself?
I'm Ananya, I work at NASSCOM's public policy team.
Got it. Thanks, Ananya. Back there, Adnan.
So, on the 10,000 GPUs within the PPP model, I mean, the question to ask is that too small a number? 10,000 GPUs is frankly nothing if you look at some of the startups, what they're using. And secondly, then the question to ask is that should we be building a capex model that buying these GPUs versus an opex model where these GPUs can be rented out and the government can rent out, and therefore you do not have that capacity. Plus technology itself would evolve. I mean, you would expect that what you are acquiring right now, do you want to invest in an obsolete infrastructure versus really working through an opex model? And again, 10,000 GPUs is a drop or even smaller than a drop in the ocean.
Okay. Any other mechanisms that we could do? This is the mission plan. Anything else? Akash, you had a point to make as well, right?
So I was telling this that why can't you follow an Indian automobile kind of framework where you start with a small kind of manufacturing setups, partnerships, which I think that's the strategy Indian government is following. You have small setups, take 20, 30 years, make Marutis, Mahindras of the world, have some sort of import substitution. So I think that's the long-term strategy. And it's 10,000, like you said, if we think that we are getting that those GPUs getting deployed faster, you can increase it. You increase the size of the fund too. That's a 20,000 crores, 30,000 crores. It's just a testing model right now. Let's see how GPUs are getting utilized. But as soon as your capacity increases, you increase the budget outlay, you increase the let's say local value addition levels. What happens with some have some sort of domestic manufacturing strategy. That's going to be
yeah. Ananya. Okay, Vash. Okay. We'll go back to Vasu.
On this idea that, okay, is 10,000 GPUs enough? We know that GPU requirement to build models is decreasing, right? Earlier we needed a lot of resources to create something, but now you need less. And so that's also something to keep in mind, is not to say, okay, do we need more? But we have this much, and what can we do with it?
Okay.
But we always need more, Yeah. But I think moving from the GPU discussion, right, the other thing, in order to understand what does it take to create the best class of AI systems, is essentially the compute, the data, and the talent, right? But I think in this policy, nothing is being told about the talent piece, because, essentially, we know that the best of the best talent, even from India, essentially migrates to US, and that's what OpenAI and, all of this big tech ends up working with.
Anything around taxation?
Taxation of?
As in taxation incentives for AI startups,
right?
Yeah.
So I'm assuming there's some form of extreme example I'd like to put, but have you heard of Operation Paperclip?
No.
It's basically when US was realizing that it was lagging behind in the nuclear race, they essentially ended up acquiring scientists, right, where they essentially provided them housing, etc. And these scientists were the ones who were working on nuclear technology. I can see some people laughing, but then that's an idea that I can propose, that, we essentially need very strong ways in order for the AI, for the AI talent to get back to India. I think even Sarvam from that matter, right? They were running these events back in SF where they were saying, "Come build in India," something with the tagline, right? So I think that sort of an exercise has to be done, which is why this policy doesn't mention anything about the talent. Even the professors, and I worked in IT Delhi, worked with published a paper, right? So I know about that academic setup. The incentives are not rightly aligned for a research group or a professor to come work with the startup on the cutting edge innovation. So even that could be one way, but I don't practically see that helping any form of innovation in India. So then the answer is, I mean, something of an operation paperclip. Yeah.
So, just to build on top of what you said, so I'm from IT Delhi. And IITs, one of the major reasons people don't stay back is actually not, I would not even say money, but it's that to make any sort of impact, you have to work like 100 times harder than you have to in US.
True.
So just to create, like for example, there is YC in US.
True.
I would like to attribute a lot of the startup innovation to YC. So Reddit, like nobody would have funded Reddit. So we need maybe some form of YC in India, because to do anything in AI, you need money.
But I
To
think-
hire talent, you need money.
Yeah, but that's a little bit of a slow move, right? Versus where the criticality of this is we want to move faster. So that's where I
How
come
is it
from.
a slow move?
Because it'll take time to build institutions.
What about a
guarantee-
sovereign fund for AI?
What is that?
As
What
in
is that?
have a sovereign, a government fund that funds AI startups.
Like sort of a
Instead.
grant?
So that's what.
No, actually take equity. Just like, for example, Singapore has its own sovereign fund that invests in companies.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
a good
that would
idea.
work.
So, but apart from the capital incentive, if there is enough incentive for us, for the AI talent to do incredible stuff back in India, I think that could also be like one of the incentives apart from the capital.
See,
incentive.
like there's a lot of opportunity to work, but people don't want to stay if they're not getting paid.
Guys, sorry.
Yeah.
Guys, come on. Guys, please, someone's talking. Yeah,
sorry.
Please, go on.
Go ahead. No, I was saying that it's not that there's no opportunity to work. If you see the amount of research that is coming out of the top institutions on Vadwani AI lab,
Not from India.
though
nowhere near.
the direction is
Doesn't
right,
matter.
but there's no capital.
There's no output.
So there's a sovereign fund, and we work with it, SIDBI, fund of funds 10,000 crores, and my boss heads the part of the investment.
Mic up, please.
And part of the investment committee, and there are plans. There are plans for, I'm not sure about the specific AI startups, but some element of green tech. So where the idea can be floated, for sure, you can have a 15,000, 20,000 crore fund.
Is there room for taxation incentives?
Yeah, I can't, it's a Chatham House, but
It's not Chatham House, actually. Too bad.
I'll tell you.
What about
Okay.
supporting angel investments in AI?
I mean, we still have an angel tax, right?
Yeah, but then I mean, even like, okay, I'm a startup, so I won't like directly jump onto what VCs think about us. But I mean, that's not sizable enough for the innovation to actually happen. Yeah, the risk taking, the gumption doesn't allow them to do that. Yeah.
See, it's very easy to create like a small company in AI, but if you have to create something that is going to compete with OpenAI, you're gonna need like at least $200 to $300 million, and that is like minimum. And nobody in India is willing to take a bet that big.
Of course, no, there is. It's called Krutim. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm shameless about this. If I troll, man. Okay, come here, anything else?
Just wanted to ask more about funding, but I think funding's been shot down.
Funding is a pain point for
what
Indian
else? Like,
startups.
just ideation here, right? What do we do to create this ecosystem? I mean, Vashul, you've seen this for like 10 years now, 11 years.
Yeah, what about supporting open sourcing?
See, open source you can support, but then like even open source comes up with an incentive. Open source doesn't come with a larger narrative to just build an open source. Even those are, and I'm not sure if people from Meta are here.
We have open data sets also. Correct. We have a national data sets program.
Well, I mean, if you really want to build, then you don't need a lot of respect for, the public data. You can just there's a lot of data that people are essentially harping on. I'm not
essentially enough data that people are scraping from the internet
There are-
and publishers.
There are unicorns that are made out of scraping data.
True. Yeah.
A very brief fact to throw. One is that the 10,000 GPUs, of course, is a very small number, but somebody pointed out to the lack of other things in policy, especially talent. I would like to also point out that the 10,000 crores you see in the India AI mission, 5,000 crores of that is going into the 10,000 GPUs, which is a drop in the ocean, half of that. The rest of the things that you see in India AI mission is going to be completed in half of that budget. So just where we stand on money, we should be very clear while we look at the options and dream about what we want. This is where we actually stand. The other thing being, what can we do more? I think while we can talk a lot about what can be done specifically in the AI innovation encouragement in India, I do believe a lot of things we are doing are right. They are within our means, and we are doing what is within our means. I think the things that we don't want to talk about are often the harder ones to fix. Why do businesses don't want to be in India? The question is not whether it's an AI business. I think it's independent of an AI sector. It is to do with other things. Why do they go to Singapore or they go to the US? Some of them are coming back now, but a lot of them who are coming back are facing hurdles and challenges which are not foreseen, which are not in policy, but that's how things tend to play out here. And until we really work on solving those harder aspects, like if these GPUs are going to Indian Institute of Science, but how exactly will that play out when people want to access it, research it? How many hurdles? We talked about user interface and friction and reducing friction when people want to access online spaces. Are we doing that when we create these opportunities for people to interact with the ecosystem? I think those are also some questions that need to be answered.
We still have a situation of companies receiving tax notices and asking them to give tax filings for their investors. The kind of harassment that's been happening of startups in this country is not funny. And of course, the angel tax also still exists, even though there were promises made that that would be revoked. People still get notices regarding that. So I guess, yes, we saw an entire Web3 ecosystem pack up and leave and go to Dubai. Founders will go where there is, where they're welcome, essentially, I guess. But basic question is, I guess these are all operational issues that need to be resolved. Is there anything else that needs to be resolved to create an environment?
Do we have enough electricity?
That's actually, yesterday Peter Diamandis in his talk made that point that a country just starts evolving rapidly the moment more energy gets produced in that country. And I know there are concerns about climate that were made, but China and India are two countries where we're seeing energy production increase rapidly, and that's actually leading to rapid sort of development in the country. Energy is important, very critical. Yeah.
So one thing which India has done in the past is develop frugal solutions and in low cost try to implement more things. I think there is optimism in that. But one thing which really lacks is research and quality research, like the kind of papers that come out of US and are next level. And there is hardly anything, like even you publish Kratrim or some other AI model, but you don't have any research or anything that you can present out of it, then it just leaves a lot of knowledge out wasted. Like that has to be changed. Like there has to be more quality research that needs to come out.
Okay.
Nikhil, if I may, to your point, I think one, and I don't think anybody sort of looks at that, but I want to just address the subtext that the India AI mission can only be a catalyst.
Just a little louder, please.
Sorry. The India AI mission can only be a catalyst. In no way should we even think of the government to be end all of creating something like this, number one. Number two, I think in terms of, again, innovation, and I sort of go back to one conversation I had, and I'm pretty sure the founders in this room would agree with me, this is 6-7 years back, a batchmate of mine went to, both of us went to IIT. He sort of went a different path, and he pretty much laughed at me. He was a Y Combinator startup on AI. He pretty much laughed at me, and क्या तुम regulate करोगी? क्या regulate? जब तुम regulate करोगे तब तक हम और आगे निकल चुके होंगे. So I think it is very important, and if it is a catalyst, and the point that Akash was making, that you have to think of these fund of funds, you have to invest in people, you have to see where the capital comes from and where even the technology comes from. That was my limited point with GPUs, that the government cannot own, the government can only provide you that initial catalyst, irrespective, and do hell with if 50% of the money is getting into it. You have to see how do you sort of create that ecosystem, invest in colleges, go beyond IITs, go beyond NITs, that use cases are solved, real problems are solved, and that's when you get that ecosystem. Otherwise, we are just talking, we are just...
I know, Anand, I think the way we will, the way we need to look at this is perhaps that one is about creating an enabling framework, but the other is also not creating a disabling framework. And I think Akash has been talking about that extensively. And I guess there is a balance that has to be struck between protection and not disabling folks, I guess, that are trying to build. Because even if you look at, for example, the angel tax, the tax notices that startups have got, asking for details of income tax filings of their of the founders, etc. All of that needs to get addressed. One last point.
There was a lot of discussion on how research is not coming out, but you can't expect research to come out if you don't fix your research funding ecosystem. That is a broad thing that you need to fix. People are not going to stay here if you don't pay researchers. You can pay IIT Bombay for GPUs, but you have to pay people on time, pay people more. So it's a broad thing that the research funding ecosystem has to be sorted out. Otherwise, no one is going to stay here.
I can hear the pain.
I want to make a very limited point, and this is a fallacy that AI research happens out of institutes. All of my friends, folks who went for masters in the US, as soon as they start doing good research, they want to work for an Apple or a Google or a Meta. Again, the government, the research institutions can only be the catalyst. Unfortunately, we are talking about a sector where cutting edge research is happening in Google, Meta, Apple, and OpenAI, whether we like it or not.
And so I think that's a great point. It's also contingent on companies to do cutting edge research. Vasul, for example, has done that for years, and he's built a company out of his research as well. We're going to close here, but thank you all for staying on till the end. I think it was quite an intense discussion. Appreciate your hanging on. Thank you. We will have the videos for this discussion up on YouTube, and we will be writing about this as well. I think the questions on liability largely dominated the conversation today, and what sort of a framework should exist. We have no answers from today's discussion, but I think we have a lot of questions that perhaps will lead to answers. So we're hoping to do this in Bangalore as well. Thanks for joining us, everyone. I'd also like to thank Meta, Google, Salesforce, and all of our partners, National Law University, Delhi, CCOAI, CIS, CUTS, and the Internet Freedom Foundation for the support for this discussion. Thanks, everyone.